Plan B approach. What you will see here is you will not see dates at this point in time. We will disclose those dates later on in the presentation. So I do want to make sure that everyone understands that that's intentional. They're not there because this is a phased-in approach, and that's what we have to focus on first. So in phase one, we have our Bright Beginnings in our North Carolina pre-K. Subsequent phases will bring students back by grade level over time. Some amount of time is needed between phases. The group decided that because we were already given a third with an A, B, and C attendance designations of rotation, this would be where the utilization of that 3-week time would be implemented. This time would be used to access the stability of the public health and operation metrics. It also gives us the needed time as an organization to adjust our processes, for example, our symptom screeners for future phases that would come on board at each of our schools. Students in the full remote academy will continue with the remote instruction full-time. They will not be impacted. So this is the model when looking at it in a grid. Phase one, which is pre-K, you'll notice at the top for week one, pre-K does not apply with pre-K to have an A, B, and C rotation. All of our pre-K students will be coming at one time and continuing through those 3 weeks. This does not include our Montessori pre-K program because our Montessori pre-K program actually is going to come in the second phase with our kindergarten group as they join us. So that leads us to phase two. After 3 weeks of implementation, we would transition to phase two in week 4. Phase two in week 4 would include our kindergarten through 5th grade. We would then have a 3-week transition, where then in week 7, we would bring on grades 6 through 8. And then after another 3-week rotation, we would then bring in phase 4, which is our 9th through 12th grade. Please understand that under our best case scenario, this model will take at least 12 weeks from the beginning of phase 1 to complete the phase transition to Plan B. Something else we want to share with you, which we've definitely heard from our public, is around our after-school enrichment program. Before and after-school programs will operate at as many existing 96 licensed sites as there is a demand and that we're able to staff. Registration will begin at the onset of phase 1, and programming will begin at the onset of phase 2. Before and after school programs will be prioritized to students during their in-person learning weeks, but it will also be available when space is available to those students that are in remote. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask our chief, Chief School Operations Officer to come up. That will be Ms. Kathy Elling, and she's going to lead you into the next part of the presentation around the metrics, the health and safety. We apologize. It takes us a few minutes in transition just so we can wipe everything down, put mask on, and step away.
Good evening. I'd like to begin by thanking our medical community. We're very fortunate to live in a community with an excellent medical system, and we've had the benefit of working with physicians from Atrium and Novant, in addition to our public health department. And in all the conversations around the safety of staff and students, 3 things that came up repeatedly, you know what they are, which is wear face covering, wash your hands, and wait and maintain 6 feet. If I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. The metrics that we have are solid metrics, but if we don't do the 3 W's, we aren't going to see any positive impact in the metrics. So I wanted to share that. So what I want you to focus on in this about our metrics is these serve as, it is a dashboard. It aims to provide a general framework for decision making, both in how we are going to be able to open schools and when, and then how we need to monitor cases that should occur in schools and make decisions. The dashboard is not inclusive of all data points. This has been a point that has been shared with us over and over again about there's many things that need to be taken into consideration regarding decisions that we would make. including the numbers and percentages that you see here on the dashboard are intended to serve as general guidelines and may be based on multiple factors, including additional community-level metrics that are raised to our attention by our public health department, the current number of schools in which we serve in-person instruction by phase, the current number of individuals attending in school at a specific time and place, and the results of any public health investigations that we would conduct or contact tracing. We also know that the dashboard, as you heard Superintendent Winston mention with regarding to this illness, it is ever evolving. So we may, in fact, as we progress towards in-person instruction and move in that way, we may end up making some minor changes upon advice from our public health team. What you want to focus on first is our public health metrics. There's been a lot of conversation in our community about public health metrics. We chose to focus on two in particular, although the county tracks several, and they are case positivity rate and the percent of positivity tests. And the reason we focused on those is because we believe those are most critical to opening school, whereas the county is tracking hospitalizations, and that's a critical metric for them, but that is not really in our wheelhouse, so we're sticking to what we believe are critical metrics for us. At this time, based on figures that were released recently from Mecklenburg County Public Health, we are at 49.7 positivity rate over, that's test positive, cases per 100,000 at 49.7, which would put us in the yellow. And then test positivity is 5.7, which puts us in the yellow. There's been, I think, some general confusion about what does green mean, what does yellow mean, what does red mean. So green is minimal community spread. Yellow is moderate community spread, and substantial is what is indicated in red. For us, green is not Plan A. We are in Plan A when the governor tells us we're in Plan A. So I want you to understand, if we move towards metrics that are under 5 and under less than 10 cases per 100,000, we are still in Plan B in a learning approach until the governor tells us otherwise. So what also is important to understand is, based on our input from our medical folks, we have determined that in yellow, we our one metric in yellow, or both metrics in yellow for 14 days, we should consider or continue, if we were already in person, learning for specific groups of identified students. So that's what the board is discussing now. As far as other metrics, we will be tracking very carefully the impact of individual positive cases that happen both at schools and at offices. In our community, you've heard a great deal of conversation around contact tracing. What does that mean? How many people were impacted? And the way we know they've been impacted is if they were within 6 feet of an individual for more than 15 minutes, with or without a face covering. So that's why the 6 feet is very important in maintaining those social distances. How do we know that? How do I know that? As we tracked some over the summer, and in cases where we had incidents of positive cases among some of our hardworking adults, they ended up being in close contact with other individuals, and we ended up quarantining some of them. So we are really hammering home, following all of the W's in the social distancing. At this point, I would like to share with you another key piece of our work, which is school readiness. Specifically, how do we know our schools are ready for opening, for in-person instruction? And we know that in part because we're tracking metrics of staffing, required PPE equipment that the state mandates, but we also know it because we're going school by school and walking buildings and classrooms. And I want to share with you some of the key areas that we're looking for. One, critical, is do we have the necessary safety materials and equipment and PPE that the state provided? And the answer to that is yes, that we have those required materials in sufficient quantities. Two, are our classrooms set up for social distancing? And you know how large some of our schools are, and our classrooms are varied, and so ensuring that we walk those properties, walk those classrooms, and be sure that desks are the way they should be, students are socially distanced. Our common areas also set up appropriately. Do we have our media centers, cafeterias, gymnasiums, other open spaces, are they set up in a way that is conducive to maintaining social distancing and meets the requirements set forth by the DHHS? Another area that's important to us is logistics, meaning we know when we have in-person instruction, kids are going to need to move. They're going to need to use the restroom. They're going to need to wash their hands, and we're going to need to know how to move them appropriately to maintain social distancing, how we're going to stagger that to maintain hallways that are socially distanced, and what does that look like in terms of the impact on a teacher's schedule? How do we help them build that into their individual schedule so that we know who's where and that they can accommodate that? And then finally, master schedules. Is the school's master schedule set up in a way that allows us to provide both in-person and remote instruction? And so right now, we are walking classrooms and schools to ensure that. At this point, I also want to share with you that we're walking classrooms and schools in a way that lines up with the plan you've seen, meaning we're walking those phases. We prioritize who's coming in first and are those schools set up. And right now, as of tonight, 62.3% of the schools that would be in that first phase are ready, and we have plans to get the rest of those ready in the next several days. And then 42.6% of all of our schools. That means that we have schools that have already started this process, knowing that they're coming up in some kind of rotation, and their classrooms have also been checked, and school buildings. Finally, being a building principal still in my head, when I think about this work, I think about some critical things. One is symptom screening, and are we set up to do that effectively at the school? Can we do it with students that are arriving by vehicle and or bus? Do we have the teams ready? We are cohorting students, and that may be a term that's relatively unfamiliar to folks, but essentially it means if I've got a group of second graders, they're my second graders all day, and teachers that would work with those second graders come to me, and the kids don't transition, and they don't bounce around the building. Why is that important? We want to know where kids are at all times. If we have a positive case, I want to know who's with that child, where the close contacts might be. But it also helps us protect the equipment that those children would be interacting with, because we know that sole use by them in their individual classrooms, which is critically important. Also, I think I've highlighted this already, student schedules we were conscious that they need to reflect a little individual additional time. So, and then addressing student illness. I'd be remiss, because I'm channeling my Gibby Harris. This is a season of all kinds of allergy stuff that's going to happen. Colds are going to happen. Flu season is going to happen regardless of the pandemic. And so we know we've got to monitor the health conditions of all of our students, and in cases where students present with symptoms that might signal that they have been exposed or have COVID-19, then we're prepared to work with them in our isolation rooms until we can contact parent or guardian to ensure that they're properly taken care of. So that concludes my section, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So I think I'll pause for questions, sort of the first batch of questions now, for any questions for Kathy Elling or Matt Hayes. Colleagues, just the way this is going to work, and I guess I'll let the viewing public know too that board members did have an opportunity to preview this earlier today, and we got a lot of questions out of the way then. So there's no need to rehash those questions. However, if there's anything that you need clarification about, or that you think the public needs clarification about, now is the time to ask. So with that in mind, I'm going to go first to the board members that are calling in, and then I'm going to go around the room. So Dr. Jones, do you have any questions yet?
No.
Okay. Ms. Sawyer, do you have any questions for this section?
No, thank you.
All right. So let me go around. Ms. Shipp, do you have any questions?
I just wanted to follow up with the school readiness and safety audit piece, Kathy. As you were saying, you said 62.3% were there. So there's still room and time to get the rest there.
Absolutely.
So this is where we are right now, what we can deliver right now. So I think that's important to know where we are now as we look at timelines to open in person.
And if I could add to that, you're absolutely correct. It is not of any concern because we can get ready. There's no factor that we have in play right now that doesn't enable us to make sure that those are all complete.
Right, just knowing where we are and where we need to go. What about training for the staff?
Yeah.
Where are we at with the completion?
Thank you for asking that. The training course is kicked off last week, and I just received a data file, and you can imagine it's pretty massive because it lists by school and the numbers of individuals actually names of individuals in the school who have registered for the course, completed the course, or not yet. So I was pleasantly surprised. I can't give you a percent, but people are taking that seriously, and we will be able to aggregate that so that we can make that metric of feeling like we've got 95%, I think it's 95% of our staff trained prior to them being able to have in-person instruction.
And the master schedules, I know that's major, and you brought that up. And so is this work, you feel like this is ongoing work or started work, or where are we?
I do think it's a little bit ongoing work. Can we hit a start target? Absolutely. But it involves, as you know, working with individual principals, working with individual classrooms and grade levels and courses and balancing some things that you're going to hear Mr. Kingsley talk about later about screen time and making sure we can do synchronous and asynchronous learning. So yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Strain?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I'll start, I think, with the dashboard, since we're there. One of the questions that I have is that our county health director, Ms. Harris, has been using a term over the last several weeks about community spread, referring to community spread, and she said she characterizes it as low and stable. But given actually the best metrics that we've seen, right, the current metrics, which are the best metrics we've seen with the trending down, we're still characterizing those as moderate community spread. I know that you didn't come up with this, but you did work with the team.
We did work very closely with the team, and we will be glad to ask again if we've got that terminology in the yellow correct. I know when we talked about what do we do when we get to yellow, in every case it's, okay, we're not feeling, in every case it's we need to consult with our public health officials to determine what is putting us in yellow. Is it something that CMS controls? Is it the number of positive cases that I have in a school? So it's meant to be a guideline for decision-making and when to access and interface with our public health. So, but that's a great catch, and I'll inquire about that.
I appreciate it. I think the other question or questions that I had, one of them was about the data-informed and phased-in approach. And so with regards to that, fully recognize that there aren't dates on there. This was looking to represent an approach. Can you talk a little bit about the data information, saying that it's data-informed?
Here. You're not going to use it? Okay. I'll just step out of your way.
Yep, you're good. Yes, so looking at the groups that we pulled together, basically what we're doing there is looking at how many schedule changes it may take for students and which to bring them back, looking at the rotations and number of those rotations that it would be, what that impact of that is on the teachers, and also looking at right now what is our current number that we have that are working, our teachers that have been approved to work remotely, and looking at basically several of those things in a combination together in which to inform.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, I think I had one more here. I will pass.
You'll pass, okay.
Yep.
Mr. Schul?
I had a question first, just a point of clarification. What was the 42.6% statistic?
Gabe, 42.6% represents a number of schools that have been audited currently out of that first group of schools that will have students in person.
Okay, so by the first phase, will we have 100%, or at least for the number?
Absolutely. we will not have in-person instruction until we verified that every school has been audited and is ready, and we've resolved any kind of technical issues they have.
And maybe I have this wrong, please correct me, but are we transitioning to a Plan B if we have a positivity rate over 5% on countywide?
According to the metrics that we have outlined, the parameters for yellow for us are that we should consider and could consider in-person instruction for specified groups of students. So we're phasing in and we're targeting specific students first.
Okay. Could you explain a little bit what the protocol is for a school that fails an audit?
Yeah, the protocol would be they'll have an identified area. Let's just say, let me go to an easy one. We go in and we've got, instead of 100% of the classrooms that are social distance and ready, we might have 75%. So as a result of that, then they can't be considered ready until they get those remaining 25% of the classroom social distance. So the team, which includes the learning community superintendent, members of their staff, I've been on visits, we'll go back out and check.
So then, off that, the first slide is talking about how decisions are made district-wide. So if one school fails an audit, then does the rest of the schools close as well?
So first of all, and thank you, let me just be clear that we don't close schools.
Yeah.
If there was, for any reason, we would transition back to C for that individual school. The school would not close a school.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right, no, that's good. But no, that's great, Gabe, that we bring that out. We want people to understand that we don't close schools. We just slide back to Plan C. And yes, the answer to that is it could be for one school, but that's not the launching of the plan. The launching of the plan and the metrics that we use basically would incorporate all of the schools in a phased-in approach. Staggered entry. That is once we are already up and running and that they've been in.
And then can you give me an example of what a functional common area setup might look like?
I can yeah, I mean, a functional common area might, whatever the capacity, if you have, you're at Providence High School,
Okay.
yes? Audrey Kell?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you come into your building, you go to your right, you've got an open area. I don't know what kind of seating is in that open area, but we would cut it literally in a third. So, because we don't want to have any area of the building exceed the 1/3 capacity of the students we're bringing into that building. So it's very much, what is the space used for? How is the space currently designed? And then how do we reconfigure the seating, other things that might be in that area in order to make it appropriately social distanced? And that includes floor markings, so that people know if they're in that area, where they're supposed to stand.
And then last question, so more generally, when we're talking about audits and we're talking about assessing schools, how much guidance is the district going to be giving to specific schools? Is it that the district is going to be assessing how much principals and schools are doing independently, or that the district is providing guidance for schools to achieve? Should I rephrase?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so we're talking about audits. I'm asking of whether the district is going to be providing the guidance on how we do things like dismissal and arrival in common areas, or...
Yes, okay, thank you. Yes, we have provided guidance and specifically based on school layout around how you can effectively utilize your space, how you can effectively dismiss. We've asked schools to designate entrances because we do need to execute on symptom screening, so we need to know where kids are coming in, both off the bus lot and the car lot as an example. We will not have a lot of entry points into buildings. They're going to need to come through designated doors where we can perform symptom screening as an example.
So each school has guidance catered to their layout?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Thank you. For our parents, who, when we were back in the day, everybody was in school and ASEP was before, everybody could go to ASEP before and everybody could go to BSEP afterwards. In this new day, will the students going to ASEP and BSEP be only the ones that are in the building? And the rest of the B, say if A group is in, then B and C still stay at home?
So what out of the 96 sites that we have, What we would do is we would offer that first to the students that were in attendance on their week, and then if there's space available, they would also be offered to students that are in their off weeks in the full remote, but they would still operate under the same hours for before and after school.
I guess if they're at home and they're just coming for, say, before school, do they just come that morning and then go back home? Or do they come and stay for the day?
So yes, ma'am, that is what would happen. We are utilizing community partners that we have that we'll talk about a little bit later, that they would be able to help us close that gap towards middle. And we also have some other things that we're going to share with you in just a few minutes that will also shed some light on that as well. Yes, ma'am.
I'll wait for the rest of that.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am.
Ms. Marshall?
I am having problems reading some of these dashboard because they're so small. And I don't know whether or not on the screen, I know the screen has all three, if the public is able to see that as well.
It's posted, actually also posted, it should be posted, maybe, I apologize, it may be posted at the conclusion of the board
Okay,
meeting, forward facing, for the whole, for the
Because
public.
I know last Tuesday, we talked about a general setup, certainly talked about the community health metrics, talked about staffing that would be updated as we go through the phases. One thing we didn't talk about was the cases. You all were going to talk about that on Thursday, which I believe you did for school. So that's been settled. Okay. And I would assume that, I mean, I've had a lot of questions. I had watched the teacher town hall the other day. A lot of questions on what happens when. There's a lot of, it depends on who, where. So, but the guidance was a general guidance here that we have access to.
General guidance in terms of the numbers and what kind of consultation we would need to have with the county in terms of, are we moving in a direction with positive cases in a particular building that makes us uncomfortable? But the specific guidance around how you handle a positive case has been outlined. I know I noticed that with teachers, and it is standardized in this way, and I know that we're wanting to be real conscious of time, but I think it's important to share. It's standardized in terms of we identify who's positive. We identified that when they were infectious in the building, who was around them during that infectious period. And then we get to the county. The county says, yep, this, these people go home for quarantine, this person, blah, blah, blah. So it is standardized in terms of the contact tracing and the process. What is not standardized is X always equals Y. Like one particular positive case doesn't always mean that a group of students or a group of adults would be quarantined. It's not that, it's just how it plays out in that particular instance.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. De La Hara?
Yes, thank you. And regarding those metrics online, Ms. Kelly, do we still think that they're getting ready to be put on board docs? Okay, I had sent a text just because I was also wanting to see them. It's really hard to see here, and my glasses, as good as they are, I still can't see very well. So we are working on getting those on board docs. I think it's important for the public to see, so that's great. Thank you. The only question I have, some of mine had already been answered, but in thinking about the isolation rooms that you mentioned, I know I've brought this up before because I just think this is so important, and I'm glad that we're able apparently to use some of this CARES funding for some of these positions to help staff that.
We're helping support.
We will. So then I guess we're contracting with a particular company.
We are able to contract, we are in contract processes with 2 of our agencies that provide LPN support, yes.
And so when there is a plan enacted with dates, I guess they'll be sufficient for at least the pre-K at first, and then they will also phase in to the particular schools when they're
Yes.
needed.
So let me make sure we understand that our certified nurses through our Mecklenburg County Health Department, we are about 36 vacancies short for 178 schools. So our first course of action is to ensure that we have full nurse coverage for the phase that's opening first.
Right.
And then we're going to problem solve each other phase and backfill where we need to. And the contracted nursing services are going to help us not supplant what the public health nurses do for us, but there are some functions that they can help with in a school building to free up the nurse to do some critical
Absolutely,
functions.
because the nurse can't manage 3 different rooms.
No,
He or
and-
she needs to be.
No, and isolation rooms
function is.
don't need to
Right.
be staffed by a certified nurse. We are not, and I've heard, I think Gibby Harris talk about this several times. My job, if I'm to staff the isolation room, is to keep the kid calm, make sure they're okay, and get their parent to come get them. I'm not providing treatment, I'm not diagnosing, I'm just making sure that we have got everybody safe and comfortable until we can get them to their parent or guardian.
And I think that's great. I just wanted to make sure that the public continues to understand that, because I think there's a little bit of confusion and concern about how all that kind of triage will happen. And I think it's great that we've put forth the effort to think through that and appropriate the funds to bring in extra hands, if you will. So thank you.
Ms. Cheek?
No, I'm so happy my colleague asked my nursing questions that I was obviously going to ask, so there you go.
Sorry.
But, and I'm very happy, I like the whole process, and to all my nurse friends out there that are not working right now, we really need you, and it's very rewarding. My mother was a CMS school nurse
It's great.
back
We
in
need
the
you.
day, and
Yeah.
it's a very rewarding profession, so all my nurse friends that are watching, this might be the time to dust off
To
your
jump back in the
your
game.
clogs and come back in.
Okay. All right, thank you all very much.
I have one question, just, sorry, one question
Chair
about
gets to ask a question.
about pre-K.
Okay.
I noticed that we don't have the ABC cohorts for pre-K, so can we talk about social distancing and, you know, can we safely bring back all the little pre-K children all together?
Yes, ma'am. They have a little different ratio that we can operate under, so we can bring them back. One of the things that has come up just recently, as of about a week and a half ago when the governor spoke, is that our pre-K students are going to need what are called mini masks. And we can understand that our pre-K students, this size mask or even the size of an elementary school mask would be too big for them. So we have those ordered. And those are coming in, and that's one of the reasons why you'll see a little bit as far as the dates and so forth to allow those to get in. So we have that for them. But no, they will all be in. They are not grouped in A, B, and C. They will show up every day.
Okay, and
And
that
it-
is
yes,
per
ma'am.
DHHS and CDC guidance.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you, that's all I've got. So I guess we can move on to the next presenter.
Yes, ma'am. So at this point in time, I'm going to ask for Ms. Laura Francisco and also for Ms. Carol Stamper, who's doing operations and facilities and readiness, to step forward and present for us. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to give you a brief update about transportation and also our school nutrition programs. For transportation, all students who have been assigned to an A, B, or C cohort have been assigned to buses. So once a date is determined, that information will start to get pushed out to parents and families. Our transportation services will begin on the first day of whatever the rotation is for face-to-face instruction. So some EC students being brought back, that transportation will begin on September 29th, and then so on as each cohort is brought back. We are still under the 24 student per bus restriction, which is 1 child per seat on the bus. That remains in place, and obviously to encourage social distancing. There will be an attestation process that parents will complete a form before the first day of their child's rotation. That form is a symptom screening attestation, will be handed to the bus driver to let the bus driver know that the child is symptom-free. And that form will be made available very shortly. It's being translated from English into the top 5 languages, so will be multiple ways to access that, and we will push those out in paper form and electronically for those families that want to print those themselves. We'll make sure the schools have them so families have access to the forms, and that will begin either later this week or beginning of next week. And then one other note for transportation, the high school end bell, in order to accommodate the number of buses that we will have running because of the 24 students per bus, that end bell is adjusted once high school is back to 1:45 p.m. And then just a note, the poster at the bottom of the screen will be displayed in every school bus just to remind students to keep one per seat, that hand sanitizer is available, and they should be wearing their face coverings on the bus. Oops, sorry. Our meal bundle program, CMS Eats at Home, has been running for the last several weeks. That you can order meal bundles, weekly meal bundles, for delivery and pickup. That will continue even as we start transitioning into Plan B. So when the EC students are brought back and the programs that you see listed, the program will continue for pickup at the 40 sites as it currently is, and for delivery by our yellow buses. Phase 1 with pre-K, whatever date that is, again, CMS Eats at Home will stay in place. Phase 2 is where we will transition, and our buses will need to be preoccupied with the pickup and delivery of children, and will no longer be able to support the meal delivery at that point, but the program will continue. So the pickup sites will stay. We encourage families to sign up for the meal bundle program on their PayPAMS account. CMS school nutrition staff at the pickup sites have technology to help parents sign up through PayPAMS if they need that assistance. And we'll also be looking at opening up additional sites once the delivery is no longer available to provide greater access in the community to the pickup sites. Finally, just one important note, when students are returned, when they are physically in school, their breakfast and lunch will be provided daily at school. When they are out on their off rotation, they can still, and we encourage them to do so, receive the meal bundles. So when you're in school, it's the daily breakfast and lunch, and when you're on your off rotation, you can order through the meal bundle program. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Carol Stamper to talk about some protective equipment.
Thank you, Laura. Good evening.
Good evening.
We want to go through with you, board member, superintendent, and for the viewing public to make certain that you know what is available for our staff and students as they come back and re-enter into our buildings. Sorry, you must have already, thank you. You had already advanced, perhaps. So first of all, we want to take a look at the what we have already provided for the staff and the students. We're also going to take a look what we have furnished in the facilities. And we want everyone to understand that not everything has been ordered just yet, but we are in the process of ordering more. And as we move through the school year, we will ensure that those products that we need to restock, we will reorder those in time that we do not run out, for instance, for hand soap. So let's look at the first column on the left, if you will, provided for staff and students. We have distributed to the schools and the departments face coverings for staff and students, both the cloth face coverings as well as we have a supply of disposable masks for anyone that may enter into our buildings that may not have one. We certainly will have a supply there for them to use. Multi-purpose alcohol-based wipes, these are primarily for the students. This is the kind of what I call this is just the pack, the one pack that we will give for the teachers to have when they come back, but the sustainable product that we are going to give to our teachers and provide is in your third column under the in process of being provided. We are in the process of providing 32-ounce spray bottles of a sanitizer disinfectant product. The key there is that it's a two-step process, but this particular product is going to have the ability to do both. You must clean before you disinfect. If you just disinfect, you're disinfecting dirt. So we want to make certain that we are wiping up, and the teachers will have that product to be able to do that in their rooms as frequent as they feel like they need for their desks, tabletops, door handles in their rooms if they would like, as well as the equipment after the students use common equipment. So all of that will be there for the teachers when they return. Back on the left column, if you will, please, the emergency personal protective equipment. If you remember, perhaps the state was, they offered up 2 months supply for our nurses and those designated individuals that are going to be helping with the medical attention for our students and staff. We are providing disposable cups. Some may wonder why we are providing disposable cups. We've ordered 1.4 million to distribute to our schools because one of the guidelines from the DHHS is for us not to offer drinking directly from the water fountain. The water fountain can be utilized, but it would be from a cup or a bottle, a water bottle. And we want to make certain that all of our students have access to that, so we are buying 150,000 water bottles. They will be at our schools when our students re-enter for them to have access for those water bottles. Some of our schools, there may be a question about, well, how many of our schools have bottle filler stations? Not every school has a bottle filler station. We've got a lot of bottles going on here. But not every school has a bottle filler station, but we do have an initiative underway that we are going to try to get at least 1 or 2 of those water bottle filling stations in every school as soon as we can. That's very important. But until they get there, the students will, they obviously, we encourage them to bring their own water bottle filled as they come to school, and there will be a way that they can refill those in the water fountains. Digital thermal thermometers, the one actually that all of us, Ms. Kelly took our temperature as we were coming in. That will be the same thermal thermometer that is at the school for anybody that enters those school buildings. Hand soap. I think it's really important that we talk about this for just a second because there's a misunderstanding, I believe, that Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools has not supplied hand soap or purchased hand soap for our school year. Not only do we have enough stock probably for the entire school year, we ordered this in March. So our planning began in March. Once we knew that we were in this pandemic, the operations staff began to look, and we knew those products that were probably that were already hard to find, but may become an issue for supply and demand. So we have been very proactive, and we indeed have hand soap available, and we'll keep our dispensers filled at all times. We have hand sanitizer stations and dispensers. If you go into our main offices at our schools right now, you will see an acrylic barrier, a couple of those. You see all these everywhere now in the grocery stores. Whenever you go somewhere, there's typically a barrier, so they are in our main offices now. COVID-related signage, there is a variety of signage, either on the floor, on the walls, that will it's a reminder and a refresher of the COVID-related types of guidance that we need to all follow when we are in our school buildings and in our CMS buildings anywhere. We talked about the water coolers, the signage above the water coolers. There is a sign there just to remind everybody not to drink out of what we call a bubbler, so don't lean down and try to take a sip out of it. There will be a way that you can get water from that fountain, however. Electrostatic disinfectant sprayers. These are kind of a mist spray that is going to be used for specialized needs. One will be used for cleaning the buses, for instance. After every morning route, in the morning and at the end of the day, every bus will be disinfected with one of these sprayers. We will use these sprayers to disinfect in areas perhaps after we may have a situation in an isolation room, for instance. They can be used in the nurse rooms. So this will be a very specialized cleaning technique, and the individuals that will be using these electrostatic sprayers either have already been trained or will be trained certainly before use. In the last column, the face shield, we heard a lot of requests. We heard some saying, listen, I really would feel better if we had a face shield. So we are in the process of ordering 1 face shield for every staff member in the schools, and as soon as they get here, we will have those distributed to the schools. While we already have furnished hand sanitizer, and I think it's a 16-ounce bottle, individual bottle, we are now in the process of ordering a 1-gallon container with a pump that the teachers will have in their classrooms for their own use, but also for supervised use for students. And I underscore supervised. It is very, very important, at least with our elementary students, that they be supervised for the use of this hand sanitizer. So a gallon is quite a bit of gel, but if we see that we need to reorder more of that, we certainly will. That was one of the very, very hard to find products in the beginning, but we've been able to find a vendor to supply those for us. I've talked about the sanitizing disinfectant spray that will be available for the teachers. The state has just this week announced that they are going to supply a booster pack more face shields and more surgical masks for our nurses, another 2-month supply, so we appreciate the state stepping up and giving us that. We've spoken about the water bottles, and then we are in the process of selecting a desk-style acrylic barrier. You've seen them, they're the 3-sided types of acrylic barriers that will fit very nicely on a tabletop, much like the size of the podium here, that if there is a need at the school for someone, I'm using an example, a counselor that may have a student in his or her office, that they may want to put that barrier up because it's a little tight quarter there. So they will have those available. We are going to furnish as many of those, but it probably will be only 2 or 3, maybe 4, depending on the cost of those, and we will have those available again as soon as we get those bids in and we can order those. Scope. If you look at the top of this page or on the slide, the district has invested $3.7 million. $3.7 million for the health and the safety to make certain that we are doing the very best we can by our staff and students when they come back to school. This $3.7 million will not be the last dollar figure you will see because we will continue to restock and reorder as we need to for the product to make certain that we keep our hand sanitizer, our soap, available at all times for every staff member in our schools and for our visitors as they come in and out of our buildings. So right now, we have already ordered and provided 66,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, 10,500 gallons of hand soap. Should last a good little bit. So, and you can read the numbers, but and yes, we are a large district and we have a lot of staff members, but I think it speaks volumes to the diligence and the understanding of why it is important that we provide this type of personal protective equipment and these supplies for our students and our staff to feel comfortable when they come back into our buildings. Another very, very important topic in the operations side of the house, and that we have tried to do the best we can with the resources that we have, is to make certain that our airflow and our ventilation and our filtration in our buildings are of quality for our staff and our students. So let me talk to you a little bit about what we have done so far. Our HVAC, or our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, we have extended our operation schedules for those. That is simply put, that means that we are running right now, we are running our air conditioner longer than we normally do. The reason we're doing that is because it pushes in outside air as much as possible, and it also keeps the air moving longer during the day. That is critical when we are trying to balance the temperature and the humidity levels. And if all of you remember, we've had a pretty hot summer, a very humid summer, and so we have to also monitor the amount of outside air that we are pushing in, not to push in too much moisture, so it's a fine balance there. And I have our energy manager here with me, and certainly we can talk about that if we need to further. But this is actually a recommendation at the national level that school districts across the country take a look at extending the operation of their HVAC systems, and we are indeed doing that. We have contracted and used our internal staff to check every exhaust fan. Now, when you think of an exhaust fan, particularly in our homes, most of them are in our restrooms. But in our schools, they are on top of, they're on our rooftops, they're in our cafeterias, they're in our restrooms. So every one of those exhaust fans have been assessed to make certain that they are operating properly. The importance there is that helps, again, proper airflow in our buildings, particularly in our hallways and in our common areas. We have what we call optimize our HVAC systems. Since 2015, we have been underway with optimizing as many as we can because they're very expensive to do, but we are optimizing particularly in our older buildings, in our older HVAC systems. So they come in, the contractors come in and they literally tear apart the entire HVAC system above the ceilings. They take everything out, they clean everything, they put it back together. They use a micro, say that word for me, Paul? Yep, one of those. Antimicrobial, I'm sorry, it was coming to me. They use an antimicrobial product when they put them back together to make certain that we are then pushing out the most, the freshest, the most quality air that we can from those systems, and that they go back to their original capacity for pushing air and the performance of the system as much as possible. So these are, we have completed in 5 years, including 2020, we have completed these projects at 50 schools. I think it is important to note here and pause for a second. There's a lot of discussion about our 39 sites that have no outside air or reduced outside air capacity from a mechanical standpoint. So of those 39 sites, 22 have already been optimized. The balance of those, which will be 17, we have bids on the market right now, and we'll be opening those bids a week from Monday, at which time we will select contractors. We will get the contracts ready, get the purchase order ready, and then we will begin work in the balance of those 39 in those 17 schools. Our goal is to have all of those optimized by the end of this calendar year or December. So that's our next target for those air optimizations. Also on the bid, just so you know, there are 3 other schools, but they happen to be some of our oldest schools. They were already in the plan for the optimization for this particular school year. Filtration. This is where we have talked a couple of times, and I'm hoping that the public remembers too. I think we've talked about the MERV, and that's a funny sounding word, but let me flip here just so I don't mess that up. That stands for the maximum efficiency reporting value. What that is basically is how effective is a filter to catch particle sizes. So we in the school district right now, our standard size is a MERV 8 filter. But we are taking the initiative for all of our filters in the school district to be upgraded to a MERV 10. It's a denser filtration. It will catch more particles. Is it a guarantee that it's going to catch all the COVID particles? Not at all. But at least it's an initiative and an upgrade from where we are right now. And I will share with you, we've talked to many school districts surrounding us, and I sit on several COO boards and conversations, and every school district across this nation is struggling with this challenge of having older buildings, older HVAC systems, and some districts are taking different initiatives, but all are looking at how far can we push for the upgrades for our MERV rating on our filters. There's a lot of discussion that you need to go to MERV 13. We, right now, in the majority of our HVAC systems, we could not put MERV 13 filters into those systems without impeding the airflow, without compromising the performance of the system. It's just too dense, and they don't have the capacity to push that. So we are going as high as we can to make certain that we are being as effective as we can to contain and trap these aerosol transmissions. We are also engaging right now 3 engineering consultants. They are local in our area. To have them to go in, particularly these no outside air schools. We are looking forward to having their proposal and any ideas or recommendations beyond the initiatives that we have already taken to help us in making our systems as efficient and as quality as they possibly can be. We'll be happy to share those proposals with you just as soon as we get those. Ventilation. One thing that's also in a lot of articles, if you read across the nation, is one of the best things we can do is push in fresh outside air. Where we have the capacity, we have already started doing that in additionally another 10 to 15%. I spoke a little bit earlier about the tricky part about this is balancing the humidity and the moisture, particularly in the evenings and at night, and the temperature inside that building. Because as we all know, as you enter moisture into an area and it sits dormant for a while, or there's other variables involved, it can result in growth, and that is not what we are attempting to do. So we're continually monitoring that balance, but we are trying to introduce as much as we can for the fresh outside air. For those sites that have no mechanical capability of pushing in that fresh outside air, we also are encouraging that we take advantage of opening our doors in the classrooms. I know that is in contradiction to what we've talked about before, because it is a security issue. But under these conditions, I think that we're going to have to use good judgment. Now, you don't have to leave your door wide open all day long, but if you just open it periodically, it will allow that fresh air in your hallway. Remember the exhaust fans that we talked about? Because they are pushing air in those hallways constantly. Some of that fresh air is going to enter naturally into that classroom. If you have windows that can be opened in your classrooms, certainly take advantage of that every once in a while, because that is also going to introduce naturally some fresh air. So there are ways that we can introduce that. I want to just end and let you know that we're not finished. We're not just stopping. The operations department has consistently and continually looked at different things, but we just don't want to take a quick leap. We don't want to go buy something because a vendor has something to sell. No disrespect to vendors that may be watching this board meeting. But we want to make certain that if we invest in something, it is effective and it is sustainable. It is effective and it is sustainable in our school district. Because oftentimes these things don't come with just one-time cost. There is maintenance cost, there's product cost, there's replacement cost. And we want to make certain that we are doing the very best we can with the resources that we have. So I appreciate your time. That is the end of my presentation. And for the operations section, again, I want to introduce Paul Hare. He is the energy manager, and raise your hand. He is available for any questions, and Adam Johnson is our executive director of transportation, and certainly they can come to the podium if anyone has questions that I would gladly turn over to staff to answer.
All right, thank you. I'm going to start with Dr. Jones. Do you have any questions? Oh, you don't have any questions. Sorry, she texted me. Okay. Ms. Shipp.
Oh, okay. I want to mention transportation. I think go back to transportation. And I definitely want the public to hear this about, that's the first thing we do is get them to school. So there is concern about the support for the bus drivers when we talk about attestation process for students before boarding a bus. And I think it's important we know how that's going to play out. If students don't have the attestation letters and they are at the bus stop.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know with the pre-K, there will be an adult, because pre-K can't even come to a bus stop without an adult, get on or off. So for that should be fine. But for those students, as we go into these phases, how are we going to work through that?
Yes, ma'am. Great question. So what we have in place is the parent attestation form. If they do not bring one to the bus with them, the drivers will have spare forms on the bus with them. We've created a packet not only of the attestation forms, but we're working on that, as well as spare masks, face coverings to have for students that come to the bus without a face covering, just again for their protection as well as the bus driver. But the bus driver, if they can and do see a parent or guardian at the stop, they can go ahead and have that paper filled out there at the location. But please, parents, don't think we're going to leave anybody behind. We're going to take all the babies with us. We're going to get them to the schoolhouse, and we'll let school administrators know, hey, we had a couple of kids here that didn't bring their forms, and we'll make sure that they get them properly filled out for the following week.
Right.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
Support of the bus drivers. I guess the bus drivers will be responsible without monitors for doing all of this work, and especially
ma'am.
with those preschoolers on the bus.
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
now you'll have preschoolers on the bus by themselves without brothers or sisters.
Correct.
If they're coming first. So that's going to be a big job.
Now, some of our pre-K buses do have monitors with them.
Yes.
So once we get to a certain number, we are allowed to have a monitor on the bus. So we do have that support when we have a larger number. Most of our pre-K buses will have fewer than 24, but in the case that we are getting to that higher number threshold, we'll certainly have a monitor on that bus for them.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Other question I had was concerning in process, what was in process in terms of health and safety inspection under control and PPE. These are in process. I thank you for your work. This is great work that's been done, Carol Stamp, in your department. But these things are in process, so that means we are not there with these things, right? In the word in process of being provided.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Shipp. Let me, maybe I can ease a little bit here. We had what I call a purchase order party a couple of days ago. So we have almost, I think there's only one product that is outstanding that we do not have a purchase order for, and that may have been processed this afternoon. So we could have changed that column, but I didn't want to do that until we were certain that we had everything on order. And then we, of course, will follow the estimated time for delivery on those. But what we have, I'm thinking before I say this, I don't think that there is anything at all that I would be concerned about that is not going to come into this district and be distributed prior to the EC student start date, reentry date of September the 29th.
Okay, it's good to know. Also custodians, you didn't mention, because they are going to be doing a whole lot of this work. And I know we're numbers down on custodians, and this is going to be critical to getting this replenishing, keeping things going in the school. Many schools may only have 2 custodians, and then these custodians, even how many are taking leave and because of, needs. So where are we at with that? Have we really looked at that?
Yes, ma'am, we certainly have. We monitor that actually daily, and Ms. Bajote will be in here in just in a little while, and probably will be talking to staffing metrics as well. And Ms. Elling was in here earlier, and that is a part of our metrics. If you will notice, going back on the dashboard, custodial staffing, to be able to meet the enhanced, key word there, the enhanced cleaning standards, because we are at a different standard now.
That's right.
No doubt. So we are monitoring those closely, and I appreciate you calling out that in some of our elementary schools, they have a head custodian and 2 custodians. And if any one of those are absent for a day or they're on a longer-term leave, that's 67% of your staff to do 100% of the work. And so it is very critical that we have all of those vacancies filled, and that we encourage our team to be in our schools every day as much as possible. So thank you for that call.
Thank you.
That's it? Okay. Mr. Strain?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I've got 2 areas that I'd like to explore a little bit. One is around the discussions about filters and airflow. There's been a great deal of discussion about that. And I was wondering if you could comment regarding the expert guidance that we received regarding the role of filters and airflow in reducing the transmission, perhaps relative to the 3 Ws that we hear about so often, and I think rightly so, right? So the greatest public direction has been to exercise the 3 Ws, and obviously optimal air quality conditions are always fantastic, but I wonder if you could comment with regards to some of the filters, airflow, and air quality questions that have come up.
Thank you, Mr. Strain. I will take that from a higher level, and then the more technical level, I'll let Mr. Hare certainly step up. I think it is very important for us to understand that even all of the due diligence and all of the initiatives that we are taking to be able to improve our airflow and our filtration and our ventilation, that nothing is more tried and true. And I'm using the words from Dr. Mandy Cohen just yesterday in an update that she did for the state COVID update that they do weekly. I just happened to see it yesterday for some reason, and there was a reporter that called in a question to Dr. Cohen, and it was about the ventilation projects that many of our school districts and others are struggling with. And one thing that Dr. Cohen said, and it really resonated with me, as a matter of fact, I got out my computer, I was telling somebody earlier, I'm not a secretary, so I couldn't type as fast as she was talking, but I went back and I listened to that again, and what Dr. Cohen said, the technologies are wonderful, the improvements are great, but the tried and true, proven mitigation and the things that are pushing our rate, positivity rates, our hospitalization rates, and other metrics that the state and our nation has set is based on wearing your face covering. I have one, but I'm 6 feet away. Wash your hands, and wait and socially distance. So thank you for that question, sir. So I think it is very important that we understand that is one layer, that is one protocol, but it's only one But the tried and true, to use her words, are those 3 Ws.
So with respect to ventilation and filtration, the filter systems as were presented on the presentation, moving from the MERV 8 to the MERV 10, we've had conversations with other school districts, and there are other school districts that don't have the MERV 8 or even lower than that. But a lot of that is dependent upon the original design of the air conditioning systems, the HVAC systems, the design of the size of the motors, being able to push the cubic feet per minute through based on whatever the guidelines were for the amount of CFM, cubic feet per minute, of air per student or per occupant. And the challenge there is that on many of the newer schools that have the outside air, conditioned air, where we bring in outside air, we bring it in and we cool it down, and then we condition it and take the humidity out of it and introduce that air into the systems and into the schools, and then return that air outside again. We have that capability to do that with the current 8, and we've determined that we can move to the MERV 10 without impacting the operation of that equipment. To move higher than that starts creating a inverse benefit, if you will, so that the higher you move in the filtration, the reduced airflow, and then you start having issues with the dilution and dispersion of the particles that are in the air. So from a filtration standpoint, right at this point in time, with regards to those systems that have that ability to bring in outside air, we're moving in the direction that we possibly can to the best of our ability. You keep hearing the number of the 39 schools that don't have outside air capabilities or have limited outside air capabilities. And in those cases, we don't have the ability to dehumidify. And when we get into the recent temperatures that we've had, where we've been in about the 80s and 90s in the daytime and down in about the 70s in the nighttime, the challenge is that as temperatures drop, the ability of the inside air to hold that moisture in the air is reduced. And you probably see in more current weather comments, they start talking about dew point in that situation. And the dew point has been in about the 70 range, and I think within the last week, I saw it rise in the middle of the night to almost 75. And if you have 75 degrees outside and 75 degree dew point, there's no way to hold that humidity in the air, and that's when we have problems within the different classrooms or different schools that don't have that dehumidification capability. Ideally, our systems are designed, like your home system is, to be able to take care of the cooling heating needs for a certain number of occupants. Right now, when we are at low capacity, if we have schools that have the ability to hold 1,000, 1,500, 200, 2,000 students, and that is body heat that we're able to take out through our systems, then we have the ability to operate properly. But when we don't have that body heat in there, then we are no longer able to cool and take out the humidity just through the cooling process. So that's where we have that continued challenge. I don't know if that answers your question, but I tried to.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Ms. Stamper, the other area I'd like to explore is work orders. And so I think of work orders as being sort of the mechanism by which requests come in, and issues are identified, and yourself and your staff can jump on those and get those sorted. And obviously that's a process, an industry process. I wonder if you can speak to specifically the health and safety related work orders, what those have looked like historically, what they've looked like since certainly August 6th, if not before then, when staff returned to schools per the superintendent's direction, and sort of the top tier and priority of health and safety and what that's looked like.
Yes, sir. So our work order system, there is a process. Thank you for that, Mr. Strain. Our staff and our staff and teachers and anyone in our school system knows that you can place a work order at any time for us to address a concern in your school. When those work orders come in, we have a priority system. If they come in and it is something that needs, what we call an operational emergency. For instance, if we've got an entire school without air conditioning, that's an operational emergency. If we've got water flowing down the hallway, that's an operational emergency. They take precedence. Our goal is to have those turned around in a day and remediate those, or at least have the plan to remediate those, because we may be waiting on parts or something else. The second layer, or the second tier, are urgents. Those will we respond to in, I think it's a day or 40 or 2 days. I'm not sure. I don't want to misquote that. I should know this by heart. But they take the second layer or the second tier of urgency. So what we have in the operations side of the house and the building services side of the house, anything that we have on a work order that we designate as related to supporting our COVID initiatives have become operational emergencies and urgents. If we have it, for instance, I'm gonna get away from the HVAC system for just a second. If we have a hand dryer that is inoperable in a restroom, right now that is an urgent for us. Because we wanna make sure that there is a way properly to make, that we have a way to hand dry if there's not paper towels in there, and oftentimes there is not anymore. So we put that on the urgent list. So just know that we are really assessing these as they're coming in, Mr. Strain, and making certain that we are going through those. We did an assessment, I did an analysis with the staff not too long ago. From June 1 of this summer until current date, whatever that day may have been, whether we studied it 2 weeks ago, and actually I have the figures just as of yesterday. And we compared those to last year's work orders. Our work order numbers overall are down. We've been able to turn around also the time for response more quickly, I think, this summer. So we're trying to keep up with those. We're trying to prioritize those and making certain that we are focusing on what we can to support what we know people are concerned about.
So just to clarify, I think there was a statement about the time to repair, and that time to repair that you're shooting for is within 48 hours for urgent, and if possible, even more quickly.
I will confirm that, Mr. Strain. I don't want to misstate anything, so let me confirm that, and I can certainly get back to the board on that. I should, like I say, Paul, do you know?
It's 48 hours for urgent.
Right. Not too bad.
No, and with regards to ops emergencies, I'm conscious that you identified either as an operational emergency or urgent, any COVID-related items. And then you used an example of a hair dryer, or not a hair dryer, sorry, a hand dryer.
Yes.
So from that perspective, that would be an example of something that would be one of the urgent or operational emergency tickets that it's being resolved within 48 hours. How many facilities do we have? How many open health and safety related items do we have right now?
Yeah, so I can tell you, so right now we have a estimated 650 buildings in our school district. In those buildings, there's probably 12,000 classrooms. That's an estimate. There's 23 million square feet and many, 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 many components within that property for us to take care of. I do not have the exact number, Mr. Strain, of those that are health and safety related right now. I will tell you, though, that in those 39 schools right now, open, there are less than 200 work orders in those 39 schools.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
That's all.
Okay, Mr. Schul, you're up.
Thank you for the presentation. I think I still have some questions about those 39 schools, because even if it isn't, as Dr. Cohen pointed out, the top mitigation effort, I still think it's a quite important one. So I think one of the biggest takeaways we can get is that outside airflow is a key line of defense in addressing this virus. And I think it's important to note that, when we're talking about air optimization projects, we're talking about ways to refurbish facilities to their original design. But in these cases, these 39 schools, the original design did not have outside airflow. So I was wondering, is it entirely impossible to schedule projects to create outside airflow at any of these facilities?
Let me make sure I understand the question. You're saying, is it possible to schedule projects to be able to create or add outside airflow?
Yeah.
The short answer is yes, it's always possible to do that. The challenge is it becomes a design issue and a limitation issue, if you will, on the design of the school, the available space above the ceiling tiles, and how you get the air into the different classrooms. And from a short answer standpoint, there have been projects in the past in which there have been what are referred to as dedicated outside air units that have been added to schools. And those projects, I don't know the numbers of them, but those projects have been used to provide the ability to introduce fresh outside conditioned air, which again is defined as bringing in outside air, cooling it down so you bring it down so you can then heat it up to reduce the humidity in it, and you can introduce that air as a neutral air into the system. So there are projects that could be done, and it's just a matter of funding and a matter of setting up the process.
So have we made any evaluations about if those could be cost effective at CMS?
There have been ongoing projects over the years, sustainment projects that I think the building services puts together a 5-year plan, and each year they roll off the ones that have been completed and roll on others. Exactly where we are, I'd have to check into that, or we'd have to check into that to find out specifically how they relate to the 39 schools.
Okay, thank you. And my second concern with that is that at the point where in the 2021 school year, we can't pursue a way to get any of these air units that could provide an outside airflow, I think that this information about which schools these are should be made transparent and made available to the public, because I think that's a key component factoring into any parent's decision about sending their child to school.
Yeah, thank you, Gabe. Those schools are already, it's already transparent. That list of schools is in the public space right now.
Thank you for
So
clarifying
that's very well known. Let me just follow up on a little bit on the answer to the previous question too, Gabe. I appreciate your question. It's my understanding, and I was not the COO at the time, but I do believe that we have attempted to push in outside air in some of our buildings that do not have the capacity with the original designed system. I'm not certain that it was effective. I don't know that it accomplished exactly what we wanted. So I want to just caution that you know, what Mr. Harris said is certainly true. We can go out and we can try to do anything. But I want to, you know, before we would you know, put any kind of effort to this, I just want to make certain that we understand. I believe we've done it, but I don't know that we were really, really happy with the results.
well, yeah, thank you.
That's pretty tough to do when you're trying to retrofit something on a system that is not built for that. So, but yeah, for the 39 schools, Gabe, that list is out there. Let me mention one other thing, and I think this is important in this space. There's a couple of other strategies that we could talk about in those 39 schools. We could talk about not using those classrooms for the moment, for a short period of time, until the COVID pandemic either you know, gets under control, or we find another technology that might help us out. We can also reduce the number of students that are in those classrooms, meaning not 6 feet social distancing, we make it go to a 10 feet social distancing. For instance, in a pre-K classroom right now with 6 foot social distancing, we're estimating about 10 students in a classroom. If we go to 10 feet social distancing in a pre-K classroom, we reduce the number of students to 7, from 12 to 7. Started out at 24, and then we go to 12, and we're at 7. But maybe that's the teaching and learning environment in those schools that we talk about. So there are some other strategies.
Thank you. And I certainly think that, maybe this does merit some additional evaluation about these dedicated air units, and as well as the other strategies you mentioned. My next question was going to be about some research that's been coming up as of late about the connection between the disease and how it can bond with molecules in aerosol-related products. I was wondering if the district has made any evaluations about how that might connect to how we're getting our facilities ready and what kind of aerosol products we're using.
Gabe, we have not studied that. I apologize. I don't have an answer for you on that one.
Okay. That'll be all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Winston, did you have a point you wanted to make?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know it's a challenge to communicate between the face
Can't
coverings.
read your lips.
I know we have mentioned a couple of times 39 schools that do not have or reduced capacity for outside air. If I could just clarify, it's actually 36 schools.
Yeah, 39 sites.
39
Thank you,
sites.
Superintendent Winston.
And 36 schools.
Yes.
So I just wanted
Yes.
to clarify that. And then also, I think Ms. Shipp asked a question around the number of custodial vacancies, and we currently have 31.
Right, and if anybody's kind of got a question mark in their mind, to Superintendent Winston's point, there are 36 schools. The other 3 sites are SPA, which now is an administrative location, if you recall. The Leadership Academy, if you've never heard of that, it's where we used to do professional development. It sits between Vance and the Governor's Village, up in the university area. And the other one is?
Amy James.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, Amy James. And that's not a CMS site, but it is being utilized and will be utilized upon reentry of students by our UNCC partner for the 49ers University.
Hey, Ms. Byers-Bailey.
Thank you. I just want to highlight one quick scenario that you mentioned with CMS Eats at Home, that we went over it fairly quickly, and I don't know if our listening audience really caught it. And that's what happens right now. The Eats at Home is being delivered by buses. And the comment was made after phase 2, once phase 2 starts, the buses will be transporting students, and the bus delivery of Eats at Home will be terminated. So if you've got, I say, a high schooler that's been getting delivery at home, and they're going to still be home for a while, do they go to the closest CMS site to pick up food, and will that site have that person's enough food bundles there to accommodate the extra people that were getting bus food bused to them, rather?
Yes, ma'am. Once we know what the dates are for transitioning the various students back into school, we will notify parents that on these dates, delivery will no longer be available, but pickup will be. And as I mentioned, we may add some additional sites to make sure that they are easily accessible in all areas of the district. But they would no longer be able to order through PayPAMS for delivery. It would only be pickup as an option. So it would kind of force them into that choice.
Okay, so even though they might have missed the comment, they will get notification?
Absolutely. We'll do a lot of communication once we know what our dates are.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Ms. Marshall.
I'm going to start with the health and safety PPE piece. I also heard a news report, and I think this is so worth clarifying. We began ordering soap in March, and it was my understanding, I think in a conversation that I had with you, Ms. Stamper, that we ordered so much soap that we were having problems trying to figure out where to store it in the interim.
That's true, that and toilet paper.
And toilet paper, excellent, excellent. So I think those are really important things for the public to know.
We didn't have any at the store.
That we have paid very close attention to our needs, and then again, to the hand sanitizer, continuing to do that. I think we all had trouble getting that.
Absolutely.
But we're there, and we're going to continue to be there.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
the sanitizing and disinfectant spray that the teachers will get, so that's going to be a process when particularly middle schoolers and high schoolers, I think, are leaving a classroom and going to another classroom. Can you just describe what that process might look like? Oh, I got into academics here, okay.
We're
Got a twofer.
cross-pollinating now between
Okay.
the operations and.
Sorry.
I can speak better to the.
Apologize. Can you repeat that just one more time? I apologize.
So, that's okay. So the sanitizing disinfectant spray that teachers might use between class changes, I just want to talk about what that might look like, just to sort of put that in. I know classrooms across the country are doing that. What does that look like?
We're going to mist them down. I'm kidding. No, we're not. No, we wouldn't. But in each of the classrooms that you would visit, you would have, for example, I've been in a couple of schools, and as soon as you enter the school building, there's a pump spray there. There's hand sanitizer that's there that they can use as they're making that transition. So there would also be that same area that would be there inside those classrooms. And I think Ms. Elling, when she was here as part of the checklist that she had on there, and I don't remember exactly what was written on there, but that's part of that process as well, is that there's those stations and setups throughout the building in the classrooms where students can go for those type of things.
Okay.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
the teachers would help us between, or some folks would help us between class changes to.
Yes, ma'am. What
That
we've,
product down.
that's exactly it. And what we've talked about is we've gone with our principals, we've shared with our principals over just the last couple of days, a lot of these processes that will have to be put into place. So these processes, protocols, operational things that have to happen, all of those things will be revamped again as we get closer to the day. We're actually, because we're actually having to get into a routine of how we do these things, and that takes time. I've watched as schools started off, and they had a large list, a large line of teachers out front, and over the last couple of weeks, that's sped up quite a bit, and they've been able to get through the process. So it's just getting them up and running and getting those, once again, getting in that routine of how they do those things. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And then I want to go over to airflow just for a few minutes. We talked about air optimization projects and for the additional 17 sites that have not been done. When does that work occur? What time of day? Do students have to be there? What happens there?
Yes, ma'am. During the summer, in a typical summer, when we don't have students in those buildings, we can work all day long. But when you do those optimizations and you're tearing the system apart, obviously there's no air. So we have to cut the air off. So we are in the past couple of years, in order to expedite more of those, we do those after hours and on the weekends. It prolongs the completion of a project, but it's not impossible.
Okay.
So most of that will be done after hours and on the weekends.
Okay, great, thank you. Now for the classrooms where we mentioned we were having problems with air because in a dehumidifying situation. I think I remember that we have bought a number of dehumidifiers as of late. Can you expand on that?
Can.
And are those used in those particular sites?
Yes, we have purchased many dehumidifiers over the year, but I wanted to check real quickly. I think right now we have 200, no, excuse me. We are in the process of ordering, 200 more dehumidifiers that we will be placing in those strategic locations in those schools.
Okay, okay,
But many of our schools already have those dehumidifiers in the individual classrooms.
okay.
To do exactly what Mr. Hare was trying to was not trying to talk about, but he was explaining to try to reduce that humidification in those classrooms.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Again, I think there are just a lot of ways to combat this, and it's something that I appreciate you all are thinking about. We're all thinking about it. I've had numerous emails over the week. What's interesting is I don't know that everybody else in the state is thinking about this as much as we are. I think we're ahead of the curve here. I have family members that are faculty in other districts, and I've asked across the state, are you all talking about this? Is this a problem? And the answer is, no, we haven't. We're moving on. Everything's going fine. And that's encouraging, I think, for me to look at the data in front of us and the experience of our neighbors that are already in-person classes and operating. And one thing I think is interesting, just to put this in context, Dr. Cohen, as you mentioned that there have been some school closures, and I know in our neighboring county, they had been, and I had looked at what were the building conditions of those places where they were closed. And in the county to our east, they were their newest buildings. So it was, it really was dependent on more of the, at this point, folks coming in. That's not to say we're not looking, and we're not going to continue to look at what happens to our students in these buildings particularly, and I think that's very appropriate.
Right.
And we will be doing that. I think we'll be paying special attention. I know I will be. I think a quarter of those are in the district in which I represent. So I'm going to pay special attention, but I also know in context, things can happen anywhere, and we're not seeing that air quality is really a negative at this point in North Carolina, and I think that is encouraging.
Exactly. Dr. Cohen actually said yesterday, and it was just happened, it was a good day to watch it, for me anyway. Another statement that she made was, even in the schools that have proper ventilation, does not prevent positive cases.
So, okay, thank you. I'm finished.
All right, Ms. De La Hara.
Okay, thank you. Well, staying on ventilation and our airflow situation, I actually learned something tonight. I think it's worth repeating, because when we talked about the schools that do not have the outside airflow, having to battle the issue of humidity, because as we're bringing that air in, then we're producing more humidity. And I think that's really important for us to put out in the public, because if I'm understanding correctly, or maybe I should phrase it this way, I have seen, for example, photographs from inside some schools where some mold has been there. And kind of the accompanying comment is, we don't have great airflow, look at what's happened here for whatever reason. But it almost seems the opposite could be the case, that because we're pushing airflow in that has more humidity, then we could be causing mold, hence why we're purchasing these dehumidifiers. Is that a fair assessment?
I'll let Mr. Harris speak to that, but I think there is there's a lot of different variables that exist. There's not a certain set or a perfect storm ever when we have that, but it is a fine balance. The other thing that Mr. Harris mentioned a while ago that I don't know that we think about, it actually helps us to have people in our buildings. Because the more people that we have in our buildings and the movement, that's part of the flow and the control of that, because our buildings are built to have people in them, not to stand empty or partially empty and run the systems at the same capacity.
And I don't know that I need anything further on that. I mean, I think it's self-explanatory, but I just think it's important for folks to understand if they see mold, that may not be the reason for it that they're initially thinking through. And so I think it was important that you said that tonight. I also notice here that you've written, or whoever put this together, that we're engaging 3 engineering consultants to evaluate and make other recommendations. In thinking about the work orders and how I like how we've kind of reprioritized what will be urgent and things like that, given the new scenarios, would there be an opportunity to hire any additional support if we deem it necessary for those maintenance calls? I don't know that we'll need it, but if we get into a situation where we find we're having a lot of urgents, that we could have access to funding that would to then get the qualified people in to help resolve them?
Absolutely. We depend on our contracted service partners right now quite a bit in the HVAC arena, because we just don't have the, first of all, we don't have the resource to invest in a lot of the initial purchase of what it takes. We don't, we just can't keep that kind of inventory. So we do hire out a lot of our contracted services right now, and believe me, we are tapping them to the maximum right now to try to help us out. I never like to really just talk about, the fact that we have reduced staffing too much, because I don't want it to seen as an excuse. But the reality is right now, out of our 23 HVAC, between the technicians and the supervisors, we have 8 vacancies right now. So it's a high vacancy rate in our HVAC technician staffing to be able to keep up with the work orders that Mr. Strain was asking about a while ago. But We're doing the very best that we can. We're pushing hard. We're working night and day to make certain that we've got it as quality as we can.
Okay, thank you. You talked earlier about how we are beginning our turning on the air conditioning, if you will, in the mornings 2 hours earlier, and also it's staying on 2 hours later. Do you happen to recall, was that a specific CDC guideline as a recommendation to do that? And I'm trying to put you on the spot. I literally saw something today that was a list of recommendations, and that was one of them. And the point I'm really getting at is, it was sent to me in the question form of, we're not following CDC guidelines, or whoever. That may not be the right agency. I could have that off. But then when I went and looked at what they were, it was like, oh, well, Carol just actually mentioned that earlier today. It was like 2 hours before and 2 hours later, and I don't know if you recall if that was directly related to that, but I guess it would be great to kind of get a sense of, that we are following, that, there's been toolkits sent down to us, guidelines, and that we're making all of those adjustments.
To answer your question, there are recommendations or guidelines from ASHRAE, from CDC, and from EPA. And there is no one guideline that is strict that says you should do exactly this. The general guideline is that before a building becomes occupied to the typical level you would anticipate it should be, it is good to start the system and get the air circulating about 2 hours ahead of time. So that's why we started at about 5 o'clock, with the anticipation that the typical occupancy level will reach a peak at some time by 7 o'clock, depending whatever that peak is. And that is to go ahead and, in those schools that you've got outside air, bring in fresh outside air, get the system to that level, and get the circulation, the dispersion of particles, that kind of thing going. And then to go ahead and keep it circulating for about another 2 hours afterwards. So we set 6 p.m. because that is about the time. Now, you're going to have some additional people, maybe an admin, but usually it's the majority of people are out by about 3:30, 4 o'clock, thereabouts. And as we get further into these different phases we're talking about of stages of bringing students back, and as we get to the point where we may get more activity, then we can adjust those levels. The other thing is that we try to also keep the air circulating in the evening hours overnight without bringing in outside air in those areas that are set up that way. So it's sort of a challenge in trying to juggle the system. The other thing that's positive that we're looking at is that as we get closer into the fall area and these temperatures come dropping down, now obviously in the next couple of days we're going to be at about 100% humidity with Sally coming through. But after that, we're going to be in temperatures that are in the mid-70s thereabouts during the daytime, and we're going to be down into about the low 50s, someplace like that, and I've seen that has varied. And that'll help us out a lot in the sense that we will get into a drier season. So we're coming up on a season of the year that it is much easier to manage all these other factors that we typically have to deal with in the summertime.
Thanks. So now I'm moving over to the PPE, and I know, Ms. Stamper, you mentioned the face shields and how we've ordered one per school-based staff. That is in addition to wearing the mask. That does not
absolutely
substitute. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I think that's good for the public to hear and for other teachers to feel safe around other teachers to know that that is in addition.
Correct.
But this face mask is still required.
Yes,
okay.
ma'am.
And this electrostatic disinfectant sprayer that you talked about that would be used on the buses and in the nurse rooms, if we were to have a cluster outbreak of some sort that would require a particular school to close down for a period of time, would that material, that disinfectant, also be utilized there?
Yes, ma'am. And that is actually what we have used because we have already experienced cases, of course, in our school district. And that is exactly the product that we have used. Bigger sprayers, but that is the product.
Okay, great.
And the technique.
Wonderful. And one last question. I guess related to transportation, although maybe it's more of an academic side too. I know we're moving the high school bell time up to accommodate, but for the folks who would be experiencing the 2 weeks of remote and not be taking the bus, will their time schedule also change? I guess that's not real. I don't know if that's directly a transportation, but it made me think of it when we talked about that today. Will they also experience a time change? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
So
you.
That would be the recommendation, so where everything
Okay.
stays the same once
So
we start in it, once we
everyone-
bring them on in that rotation. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Cheek?
All righty. So I have a list of things. So we'll start with one of the questions that just came up with the ACs. So the comment keeps saying that we're turning the ACs off at certain times. Are we actually turning them off, or we're resetting the thermostat, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question.
So are we turning the air conditioner off, or are we just setting the thermostat for a different temperature, which means it may not cycle on and off as much?
Most of the systems in the 180-some buildings or 180-some sites are computer-controlled, remote access, and there are multiple ways of manipulating or managing the systems. There are schedules that we can use. Then there are set points that we can use for temperature. And the one thing that we have done in the last, since August, is attempt to minimize the introduction of humid air at night when you've got that high level of humidity and the low temperature. And the way we do that is there is a set point called night high limit that typically is set at 85 degrees in a normal year, which just means is that in your normal situation, it means that when the building goes unoccupied and there's no one in the building, it would allow the temperature inside, depending on the solar heat gain, to rise as high as 85 before it actually would kick on. We've dropped that temperature down to 74. So once you get to the point that you go into an unoccupied mode, the night high limit is what controls the temperature in making sure the system continues to operate or maintain it. And there are delays or timed situations or sequences, if you will, in the various equipment, from the chillers and from the air handler units and that type of thing.
I think that answers, I want the public to understand that we've changed the temperature. Much like I have a computerized thermostat in my house, and mine is set different during the day, well, although now that I'm working and we're at home during the day more, it's kind of set for the same temperature around the clock. But this is, you're changing the temperature for different times of day remotely. So we're not, there's a lot of talk out there in the media and in social media that we turn the air conditioner units off when the teachers leave. So that is not what is happening. There's adjustments that are made, but it's not, we're not flipping the switch off.
That is correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to just be really crystal clear on that. And I know it's been said a few times already, but Mandy Cohen literally said, it's not about the air quality of the buildings, it's about the 3 Ws. And she's even doing commercials now. I don't know if y'all have seen it. She's got commercial spots throughout the day talking about the 3 Ws. And I believe those are wear a mask, wait 6 feet apart and social distance, and wash your hands or sanitize. It's not about air quality. We have 115 LEAs in North Carolina. We probably are in the top part of that for the condition of our buildings, because I've been through parts of our state. The buildings are in bad shape. We have certain areas of our state that are in more humid and more damp areas at the coast. So clearly air quality is an issue at the 115 LEAs, but the only one I ever hear talked about in the media is CMS. It's perplexing to me. I haven't heard them go to our surrounding counties and ask them those same questions. So I'm not sure the purpose of that, but Mandy Cohen really, really did say, didn't she, that if we wear masks, we wash our hands, and we stay apart from people, the air quality of a building is not the high contributing factor to viral spread in a school, or in a church, or in a musty church basement where kids are meeting in pods and having education right now, or in a daycare center that may be in a building that is 60 years old. There's air quality issues in every type of building, restaurant, Walmart, not Walmart, retail store, whatever, across the state. It's not about air quality, it's about the 3 Ws. Am I correct, Ms. Stamper? Could I be any more clear about that, Ms. Stamper? Make that point any more clear?
No, I think you've
Okay.
done very well.
Did I beat that one hard enough? Okay, so another comment, the topic that came up is, I heard my colleague, Ms. De La Hara, mention the dehumidifiers. I know when I've had a dehumidifier in my house because of humidity issues, I had to empty this little bucket out of it a couple times, like once a day. Are we asking our teachers to do that, or is there a janitor that's doing that?
Actually, they're piped. No one empties a bucket.
Yeah.
So
Okay, good to know.
that is taken care of itself in its own way in each classroom, and it may be piped outside through a PVC pipe, but we don't empty buckets.
Okay, because I have to do that at home, so that was the first thing that I thought about. Who's emptying those dehumidifiers? So you said you have sanitizer disinfectant that does the double duty of not just only cleaning, but also disinfecting the virus. Are teachers now, I mean, it's been a little while since I had elementary school kids. Now all my kids are out of school, but I remember on the teacher wish list, there was things like disinfecting wipes and all kinds of stuff, because the teacher was always cleaning up after the kids. I also hear some buzz about, I hope they don't expect me to be cleaning my room, but teachers have always cleaned up after that. So we're just going to be instructing teachers that this new specific cleaner is being provided to them. They don't have to ask for that on their wish list with parents anymore. We're actually giving it to them, and it's a safe thing for them to use without a mask and gloves on.
That's correct. Thank you, Ms. Cheek, for bringing that up. I think that's an important point as well, in a couple of ways. Number one, we do want to make certain that the product that we are using is certified through the EPA, and it's on what we call an N list. So I just caution teachers, absolutely, staff, you may bring in products, but please ask us. We would be happy to help you determine what product is effective, because that's the thing. Not every product is effective on the human coronavirus, or in this case, the COVID-19 strand. So that's one thing, and yes, ma'am, I think every teacher, you organize, you clean, but now it might be a little more of a regular schedule, because you would be doing that even with some equipment that is a common touch point for the students in your classrooms. So that might be a tad different, but yes, I think they've always had that pride in cleaning and organizing their rooms.
But so we are providing one of these disinfecting spray bottles for each teacher, and then they'll be getting refills as needed?
Absolutely.
This is very good to know, because I know that's something that's always been on their wish list.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think the other question I had was the janitor staffing. I know we have some vacancies. Are there contingencies if there were, let's say, two janitors, the janitor staff, the 3 staff, that were all maybe exposed or had to be isolated? Is there some contingencies to bring janitor groups, contracted groups, the team, the B team or whatever, into a school to substitute for people, or if the school is really experiencing a lot of challenges, to bring some extra janitorial support into that building?
Yes, ma'am. We are actually underway with that scope of work as well, and we have done that in the past, that we have contracted extra services to help us with supplemental cleaning. And in this case, if we have somewhere that we may be experiencing a full custodial staff that has been exposed or maybe in quarantine, right now, as we move through phases, we will be able to redirect internal. Because, for instance, our custodians that are at our high schools, they can be redirected and they can serve our elementary schools and then our middle schools. There could be a time that, as a part of our metrics, that may be a challenge, and it may be a compromise to us being able to continue those enhanced cleaning services. But right now, we're in good shape, Ms. Cheek.
That is wonderful to hear. Ms. Stamper, I cannot thank you enough. When I hear things like the fact that you stockpiled so much toilet paper and hand soap in March that you didn't have anywhere to stock it, it concerns me, one, because I couldn't buy toilet paper in March, but I'm happy that we had it for our students. So now we know where that problem came from, Ms. Stamper. But in all seriousness, I think there's a lot of perceptions out there that we've been sitting on our hands since School got out on March 13th and not really done a whole lot until the governor said it's time to go back. And this staff, you can't see the bags under their eyes and the weariness and the tiredness in their bones because they're hiding behind their masks over there, but it exists. And our staff has been tireless and just completely dedicated to super long hours with constantly changing metrics and guidelines and direction. And I just want to say thank you, because what I'm hearing now is what I was clamoring for this summer when I was being a little loud about it, but it's here, and I'm so thankful for it, and I want to say thank you. I know that my fellow board members feel the same way. We've come a long way, and being able to share with the public the amount of volume of work that we've been doing. So I thank you so much for that, and I'm looking forward to more presentations coming shortly. Thank you, Ms. G.
All right, I just have one question. Slide 18, the listing of where we invested $3.7 million in health and safety. I just wanted to know where that money came from. Was that CARES Act funding, or was that money that we had to reallocate from another part of our budget?
It's a combination of both, Ms. Dashew, but I will tell you that every time that we can possibly use the CARES Act funding and the item or the supply or even the labor is eligible, we are using the CARES Act funding.
And the CARES Act funding often comes with very specific, there are only specific things you could spend it on.
They do.
So.
Absolutely. A perfect example is hand dryers. We can purchase the hand dryers. We cannot pay for the installation of the hand dryers with the federal funds.
And
That's just an
depending on
example.
how long this pandemic lasts.
Yes.
We will keep incurring these costs.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. I tell you what, I'll bet the world knows more about HVAC systems than they ever knew they needed to know.
HVAC
at this
101.
point. So let's move on. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So this time we'll ask for our Chief Academic Officer, Mr. Brian Kingsley, to come in, and he's going to speak to you about the student learning experiences during Plan B.
Like Lucy and Linus here. I need my snacks now. I can't eat them while we're here. Yes.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you here today to talk to you about the student experiences during Plan B. As we have an opportunity to break down the student experiences, I'm going to break it into a couple various components, but I want to start with the full remote academy, knowing that received a lot of attention and interest early on at the beginning of our academic year, and we want to make sure that our families hear us loud and clear that in this particular proposal, as our district is considering moving from Plan C to Plan B, we will continue to honor all of our families' commitments for the first semester enrollment in the full remote academy. We do want to acknowledge that we understand that some families are already beginning to contemplate their decisions for the second semester of this school year, whether that means to opt out of the full remote academy and possibly into one of the 3 tracks that you've heard earlier tonight, or possibly opt in, that they did not have an opportunity or they did not want to at that particular time earlier in the year to choose the full remote academy and they wanted to enter. They do have an opportunity to work directly with the school's principal and the school's registrar no later than December 4th. We want to make sure we acknowledge that date now and open up all of our enrollment for the second semester. That being said, we recognize as a result of our entire community dealing with this pandemic together that there are hardship scenarios that need to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis at the school level with each of our respective families. So as a result of our student assignment guidance and attendant guidance given and provided to our schools earlier this year, if any of our families are dealing with the various circumstances that are outlined here on your screen here tonight, this objective criteria is used on a hardship cases with our respective principals that we can reevaluate their current decision for the first semester right now. That means if a child or a member of the household ends up dealing with a specific medical diagnosis or there's a change in sudden child care needs, or finances, employment, or if there's an opportunity, we know sometimes our families are transient in nature and move across the community or into our county. We want to provide all of those options, and we will deal with those individually. But what's most important here is that we will continue to honor those commitments that were made 4 to 6 weeks ago. As we move and think about the particular learning experiences for all of our other students that would be returning for some portion of each of our respective months of instruction back into our buildings for a brick and mortar traditional model of instruction, I think it's really important that we frame these experiences with the right compassion, the right grace, and the right amount of empathy, not just for our families and for our children, as we're all trying to identify what's best for our students, whether it's in remote learning. And obviously, we know that all of our students' needs aren't going to be met in a remote environment, and some students will only prosper based upon those in-person experiences. We want to understand that. But I also think that that compassion and empathy and grace that you apply across our community also needs to be acknowledged for all of our teachers and all of our school leaders who are working absolutely around the clock to try to identify how to connect with students where they didn't have the pleasure or the absolute opportunity to have an in-person experience first, that their initial interactions and relationship building with students were via technology. In some instances, they may have not yet seen the child's face, but having opportunities to engage them in assignments and have meaningful feedback. I think that's just really, really important. And we've worked really hard in partnership with our schools and our teachers and the feedback of our community to make sure that this year's experience under Plan C was more robust than what our families encountered post-March 13th. We believe as a system that we did pretty well post-March 13th in terms of pivoting our large school system almost 180 degrees in the direction of remote learning pretty quickly. But we also understanding with elevating those expectations come with increased challenges, knowing none of the complexities of this pandemic got easier for any of our families since March 13th. In some instances, they've only got more challenging. And so going from an expectation of 2 to 3 hours of an instructional experience last year to what is mandated by our state in terms of instructional hours, we are mandated by the state as a result of our district calendar to adhere to 1,025 instructional hours over the course of the year, which translates to 6 hours of instruction per day. That's a lot more. In some instances, that's double what our families experienced. We've had an opportunity over the last 4 weeks to also partner with our local neighboring districts who some in certain instances have already begun to approach a hybrid model of instruction. And what we've learned is that approaching hybrid instruction is not impossible, but it will come with trade-offs. And it's not going to be easy. And I think we have to acknowledge and name that some of the situations that we are about to talk about this evening, it is not meant to be presented as this is what Plan A would look like. Plan B will not be Plan A, and it won't be Plan C. It will be different, and we'll talk a little bit more about specifically what that can look like across our schools. But I appreciate just your framing and your feedback this evening. As we think about the commitments that we must make, regardless of the modality of instruction, that's what's outlined on your screen here tonight. We commit to, regardless of modality, full remote academy. You're one of the 2/3 of students who are still continuing to receive remote instruction, but you're a part of one of those various tracks that will come into our school at some point for an in-person learning experience, or you are in front of your teacher for the first time this year in an in-person learning experience in your classroom. We commit to making sure that you will have direct access every single day to your teachers. I do want to name and acknowledge, though, is that we will have teachers across the district, and I say this with a compassionate heart, that will be responsible for supporting and instructing students who are in person, as well as students who are also at home, wanting to learn, needing to learn remotely, or a part of the full remote academy. That complexity of this scenario will play out differently across all of our schools based upon various conditions. In some instances, we've had single-digit percentages of students at a specific school commit to the full remote academy, 7 to 8% of the student population. In other instances, it could be over 50%. We know that district-wide, it's about 1/3 of our students. As a result of that, the staffing complexities around supporting students both in person and remotely will vary and will be different. We also know that we'll have opportunities as we think about small group instruction and the opportunities for intervention enrichment, that in some instances we're going to have teachers or students, receiving additional teachers in this plan. You may have students who have been accustomed to receiving instruction live, synchronously through one specific teacher, and may now actually begin to get supported asynchronously with a very different teacher on the same course and the same topic as a result of our schools being imaginative and creative to try to identify the best way to think about how we can support our students without compromising on standards, without compromising on quality, and without compromising on human relationships. But we also know that there are other instances, and again, this will get more complex based upon the uniqueness of a specific teacher. What I mean by that is in a high school, you may have one Latin teacher. In a K-8 school, you may have one science teacher who teaches 8th grade. And having an idea of how they are beginning to work in partnership with their principals, with their departments, to begin to think about how they're going to support instruction in new and meaningful ways, we're going to need to be creative. It may mean that we divide the instructional blocks where one part of it is synchronous and live and the other part is asynchronous. It may mean where we stack the live instruction to the mornings or to the afternoons to provide greater flexibility to ensure that we have a really, truly unique, meaningful experience when our students come back into our buildings and try to get to a situation that we're more accustomed to in terms of live instruction. But I would share with you, and I just want to reiterate, because I know many of our teachers and principals, as well as our families, are listening, we need to anticipate some change. But our principals are working around the clock to try to mitigate that and have various plan books or playbooks in mind, depending upon how this plan may roll out. We're continuing to commit, and we always will commit to honoring the accommodations that are outlined in any of our students' educational plans, whether they are an EC student, an English language learner, or a TD student. We also know that our live instruction can't model what I'm doing to you right now, simply direct instruction, talking to you. It needs to be collaborative. It needs to be an opportunity for all of our students during synchronous instruction to access their teacher, to ask questions, but also to access each other as students. That's going to be an important part that we will not compromise. And we will continue to make sure that we're adhering to the emotional and social needs of our students, as this transition will surface new needs for our students and for our teachers. And so our advisory block and our commitment to social emotional learning will continue to hold true whether you are in an in-person experience or learning remotely. All that being said, what's most important as we continue to honor the brick and mortar model and the complexities that come with this Plan B is that we continue to put the joy of teaching and learning and the appreciation that our teachers and principals deserve back into our schools and back into our classroom. That's the heartbeat. And one part of that, which we're hopeful will generate some excitement across our schools, and many of them have already begun doing this, is that we have begun to ask our principals, whether they have done so or already, to greenlight all co-curricular activities, whether it be before school, after school, and sometimes even taking intentionality and purposely embedding them during the school day so more of your students can access it. And whether that's the Math Olympiad, speech and debate, but extensions of the curriculum to make sure that we're getting back to a more holistic approach to public education is incredibly important. And those things should be offered both remotely and in person to the best extent possible, as long as we're adhering to the social distance guidelines and the safety expectations of our state and or our district. I want to pivot here and share with you a little bit more about something specific that has generated a lot of, what I'd like to say is enthusiasm, some questions, some concerns, and in some instances, some kudos too, around how much time our students are spending on a screen and on a device. And as a chief academic officer, I want to say to you is that remote learning comes with a reliance on technology. It is not what we have ever been accustomed to, but we also recognize that this is an opportunity to truly reflect on how learning and teaching is showing up in our families' homes, to recognize what our children are experiencing and how can we tweak and make benefit the student experience in different ways, utilizing that feedback. And so I'm proud tonight to acknowledge and let you know that all of our new curriculum that you've heard us talk about for over the last year and a half in this district, not only has this system strategically invested in digitizing that curriculum for our elementary schools and our middle schools, but we have also invested in the print resources that go along with each of this curricula. We have asked all of our school principals to interested families. We are not in a situation where we want to mass distribute. We want to make sure that we are using our resources wisely. But if we do have families that want to be less reliant on our curriculum resources that are available to them via technology and more reliant on the actual books that they can read at home, we have personal copies for our students, as well as workbooks and other print resources that can make a little bit more balance in terms of how our children are experiencing their instruction in our elementary schools and our middle schools. So that is available, and we have asked our principals to begin distributing that now to families that are interested. We also wanted to kind of take a second to take a step back. We've learned a lot over the last 4 weeks. And what we have framed as an expectation to this community about 6 weeks ago in terms of what synchronous instruction, live instruction, and asynchronous instruction, learning that's flexible, activities that should be flexible, may have played out a little bit differently in implementation. And so as we've had honest conversations, what we recognize is that our schools have had really good intentions about everything that they've done to approach remote learning. In some instances, we have been worried as a system around the learning loss that we know in some instances took place, not with all students, but some students last spring. And we've tried to identify ways to continue to push the academic press and the high expectations, the culture of excellence that this district has at its center through our remote learning experiences. And somehow, in some instances, how that has played out is our synchronous instruction may have gone longer than what we said it would. In some instances, our asynchronous instruction is not flexible, where we're asking some students to stay on camera and to complete their individual assignments while having good intentions to ensure that their teachers are accessible to them on screen in the event that they have any questions. How that plays out across our homes in Mecklenburg County is different. We know that we have some families where our children or our students are taking care of some of their younger siblings. We know that we have students that are have jobs, and they need greater flexibility in their assignments and in their work, as well as being able to take breaks from the computer. And so in the conversations that we've had with teachers over the course of the last few weeks, as well as with our principals, we have committed to publishing new standards for screen time across this district next week. We have shared these screen time standards with our principals already. They are working with their learning community superintendents on evaluating their schedules to make sure that in any instances we may have opportunities to be more efficient and streamline screen time, that we want to make sure that we acknowledge how best to achieve that together while also not compromising on the access to our teachers. We won't mandate that asynchronous instruction for all of our students to be on screen, but we will make sure that it certainly continues to be an option for our students in the event that they have questions and want access to their teachers. So we're hopeful that will continue to be felt across our families, both not just in Plan B. That is an expectation for right now in Plan C as well. So I just think that's important to acknowledge. We want to make sure that we're continuing to be mindful of the length of time that our assignments are. It's easy, and I've fallen, as an educator myself, have fallen into the trap. It's easy to assign more work than you realize when you're not necessarily in an in-person experience and you're sharing that via technology or an email. And we need to be really mindful that sometimes our students are not just on screen all day for instruction during the school day, but they're also going to continue to be reliant upon technology for homework. Now, asynchronous instruction won't mean that they don't need to log onto a computer. In some instances, it's the computer that is the portal to turn things in, to ask a question. But we are asking our teachers to ensure that we're thinking creatively about the types of assignments that we're providing to make sure that they're not fully reliant upon the utilization of technology and leverage different types of activities whenever possible. We want to make sure that we're minimizing screen time as much as possible, and we're going to continue to commit to listening to our constituents. We're going to commit to listening to our teachers and our principals, but I also want to acknowledge that we are not going to let back and fall back on our expectations, but we are going to center our expectations on quality, not quantity. As we have an opportunity to close out our thoughts what I'm sharing tonight around the student experience, I also think it's really important to be mindful that in a remote environment, it's always going to be important for students to receive meaningful feedback on their learning, on their instruction, to make sure that they are aware of their progress or their lack thereof so they can make meaningful adjustments to their participation and their engagement, especially knowing that this year, more dissimilar to last spring, students are getting grades. There will not be a pass withdrawal scenario at the end of this quarter or at the end of this semester, but grades are not the only way of feedback, right? And all things do not need to be graded. Having students make sure that they are aware of how they're prospering and progressing with standards is incredibly important. As we've had an opportunity over the last few weeks to listen to students like Gabe and Generation Nation and other students across the district, meaningful feedback has been mixed. In some instances, people are getting the sweet spot, exactly what they need. Most of the time, our students feel like they have access to their teachers, but they may not always be getting the feedback they need in order to really know what to do differently. And so we're doubling down on this as a commitment moving forward in Plan B, but also right now. And again, when we've been receiving feedback, I want us to be mindful that we've only are still in the first month of school. But I also want to recognize some of those trade-offs and the challenges as we've had collaboration and conversations with supporting districts. This is an area where if you have a teacher at the secondary level who has over 150 students assigned to them, this is incredibly challenging. And in some instances, you have to make choices around the type of feedback that you're providing remotely and the type of feedback that you're providing in person. And our teachers have never been put in this position before. And so I just want to recenter us on the compassion and grace and the opportunity to continue to improve and iterate against this. We are listening to the feedback that we are hearing from our families, and we are working around the clock in partnership with our teachers and our principals. And it's just been nothing short of extraordinary to hear them go through these various design challenges to identify what they need in order to be successful. And our principals are working with them to identify how to carve out more instructional planning time, how to be more specific around partnering them with other teachers across the district, as well as within their specific schools, to think about how we can approach co-teaching and team teaching in new and meaningful ways. But it's not going to be easy. And I'll close here tonight saying that social distancing, as we've talked about it from a health perspective, and it's still going to continue to be a health perspective, but it's also, and it has instructional implications as we approach classrooms. And we think about having a smaller class size, we still need to adhere to social distancing from an instructional standpoint. So especially from our younger students, when we think about small groups and the way that we have playtime and story time on the carpet, some of those things are going to need to feel different and look different. And that's going to be just as hard on our teachers as it is our students. But we will continue to adhere to state expectations, as well as the revised NC Strong Schools Toolkit that just recently came out early this month that set out new expectations for how that plays out for our pre-K students. We know that our pre-K expectation is going to be a little bit different in terms of social distancing requirements, but we feel confident that we can meet that as our class sizes in pre-K are around 18 students per class. And we also will make sure that we have an opportunity, because pre-K is voluntary, we also recognize that we don't want to lose any of our pre-K families. And so we will ask and engage them in a choice in whether they want to continue to, and we're hopeful that they will come in to our schools for an in-person experience if the board approves of phase 1 or phase 2, however that plays out. But I want to acknowledge that our families, our pre-K families, we will provide them an opportunity for choice on whether they stay and receive remote services or come back into our buildings. That will obviously play out differently for our other students depending upon whether they signed up for the full remote academy or not. That's all my comments for this evening. Dr. Hayes, is there anything that you'd like to add, or is there an opportunity for questions at this time?
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, let me start with Ms. Cheek. I'll switch directions this time, and we'll do a quick time check. It's 8:25, and we've got a bit more to go, one more section before we come to the recommendation.
I'm not going to say a whole lot, but I absolutely love the first two things that you said, which was lead with compassion and grace. If I could just ask our whole community to just adopt that and just kind of just absorb that into them. The one, really, the quality over quantity, I just am super happy that you guys are receptive to the feedback that families have given us. I still on a daily basis get emails from parents that love what's going on. It's not all negative. And so I need you to understand, I need the teachers to understand that. I think it's overwhelming to some, and we know that, and I just appreciate that you are working on ways to mitigate some of those challenges. I'm extremely happy that we're looking at ways for our co-curriculars to get going, especially for our upper grades. That is how students find their path and find their gifts, and we need to really work on that and make sure that that's happening. So that's it. I don't have much to say, but thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to parents and the feedback.
Ms. De La Hara.
I'm going back to the first of your presentation with the full remote academy, and I'm really glad that at the school level, we're going to do our best to try to make changes where we can in case we need to, because I think that is important for many reasons. So I'm glad that you all have thought through that. I do think it's important for us to just overstate that when we're talking about going into a Plan B, that it is 1 week on or in the school and 2 weeks still of remote instruction. And I know that seems silly because it seems so obvious, but sometimes I feel like from the comments that I get that when folks talk about going back into the school building, that they really do think that that would be in a Plan A situation. And so I'm just stating the obvious only to help folks understand that it is going to be a new level of complication, if you will, and there's wonderful things that are going to come from this. But just to set that expectation, because I think there'll be some surprises when they realize, oh, that's 1 week on and 2 weeks off, if you will. So that's not really a question, but just a statement. I assume, because you mentioned K-8s, and it made me just think about it for a moment, just to clarify in case there's families at home that are wondering, when we're talking about those phases on the first slide from earlier tonight, there is no option for K-8s. The 6, 7, and 8s at K-8s would be treated just like any other middle school.
That is correct. We will go by the grade bands, not by the school configuration.
Okay, it just occurred to me that there might be some families thinking, well, wait, I'm in a K-8. Would that mean I'm in the elementary or not? So that would be a situation where the school would be divided in those phases.
Correct,
Okay.
thank you.
And that's it. No, thank you. Thank you for so clearly laying things out tonight, and I agree with Ms. Cheek. Thank you for listening to parents. I know that a lot of feedback has been coming in, and we've been forwarding it on, and folks collecting that feedback, and we'll continue to do that because there's a dual process that's going on here. We're simultaneously, where you all are tweaking and making virtual learning the best that we can, taking that feedback, moving forward, and trying to figure out what a great Plan B looks like at the same time. So it's a lot of tremendous work, and we thank you for it.
Thank you.
Ms. Marshall?
Briefly, I also echo all the sentiments expressed as I've been responding and forwarding on feedback, telling folks you all are very seriously taking this and making adjustments, recalibrating, and that is obvious. The sort of the adjustments that you've been making across the board to synchronous and asynchronous screen time, I would assume those have already been communicated, but should parents see a sort of a rapid change, or what do you anticipate folks seeing? And I know also that it's sometimes some schools have had a different viewpoint on it than others, so consistency across the district sometimes is tricky.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we spent the last few weeks, as feedback has been rolling in, trying to identify whether the feedback was school-specific, teacher-specific, or something that really required us to think differently as a district about how we're approaching this collectively. And what we can say is that it's been a little bit of all of those things, right? And I think as we have an opportunity to continue to open up meaningful feedback loops to our families around how this experience continues to improve, our learning community superintendents right now, as a part of their readiness to move into Plan B, are working with our respective principals on the overview of their master schedules. And so we have met with principals this week about screen time. Again, I just want to state that we will be publishing a standard to our community, so they can acknowledge what that expectation is across the district, and we should be publishing that by next week. So we hopeful that that those changes will begin at least at that point. We should see a slow transition over the next week, but it shouldn't be a hard pivot. I don't want anybody to have a misguided expectation that they're going to walk into a remote learning experience tomorrow and experiencing something. We have to be very thoughtful about this and make sure that we do this in partnership with our teachers and our families as well as our principals. So it'll be slightly guided, but if I can say anything to be clear about this, these expectations around screen time outlined tonight are not about Plan B. Right? They are about our current approach to Plan C as well as Plan B.
I see. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I'm good, thank you.
Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Regarding the screen time, What adjustments are being planned for the students in my community that have had continuing connectivity challenges and have not really been able to participate in the remote learning so far?
Well, our greatest hope is that we can continue to try to problem solve that through hotspots. I mean, the use of technology and the reliance on technology is not going to go away in Plan B, right? We know that. And even though students will have an in-person experience that will be meaningful for 1 week out of every 3, that getting the connectivity issues handled is still going to be something that's incredibly important. I would also say, and I want to thank the various constituents across the community that have wanted to partner with us to become remote learning facilities. There are various organizations across the district that are now available, as well as across all of our towns and municipalities that are working with our Community and Family Engagement Office to begin offering full-day services to our families in the event that they don't have connectivity issues at home. And we're also hopeful that the before and after school programs, our ASEP and BSEP programs, based upon that availability, that we might have some families that want to access our schools for 4 hours during a day and try to identify how they're able to come in and download all of their materials and access Wi-Fi. And so we're trying to explore everything that we possibly can, but I think having full-time 24/7 remote access using hotspots is going to obviously be our primary solution, but our community has really come together to offer other opportunities for our families to consider as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I got an email today about one of our partners that was wondering, are we considering the possibility of using some of our in-person class time outdoors? Possibly in some of the school gardens or some enhanced opportunity that could be available outdoors, weather permitting.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of our campuses have beautiful landscape space. Some already have outdoor classrooms that have been built in partnership with various organizations across our community. And so, yeah, we certainly want to reinforce the idea of being able to get outdoors and learn outside and have fresh air, and to the extent possible. We know that's not going to be feasible for all students every day. But being able to get outdoors is something that we want to make sure that we encourage, not just from a recess perspective, but an instructional perspective as well.
Okay. And my final question is regarding some phone calls that I received just this morning from parents who are fearful about sending their children to in-person classroom instruction. Are they going to, if they continue to be concerned enough not to want their child to come in, but they're not in the full remote academy, will they have an opportunity to opt out and go into full remote academy as we phase into in-person classes?
It is not our district's intent to open up full enrollment to any family that may want to reconsider what they chose for the first semester, but it's for good reason. You have seen tonight a phased-in approach to the reopening of our schools. And that calendar is drawn out as a result of the scheduling implications that need to be handled at the school level in order to support both the full remote academy as well as the 3 other tracks. Any mass changes to the attendance and enrollment in the full remote academy will create a scenario where those guidelines, what I would share with you respectfully, would need to be delayed as a result of us trying to identify how to reorganize and reschedule our district to accommodate any of those significant changes. We know, of course, that there are some families that are dealing with hardships. That is one of the reasons why we wanted to identify some objective criteria that any of our respective families can work with our principals. But we are hopeful that that will appease our families, that we can continue to provide a very safe and healthy learning experience during this in-person experience to but to make sure that we're engaging our families in a space of trust, and then have an opportunity that if they want to change their decisions for the second semester, that we give them the flexibility to do that prior to December.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it.
Okay, Mr. Schul.
Yeah, I have a few questions and comments that I just want to run through, and I'll try to be brief. So first I want to talk about the principals asking interested families in print materials. Could you just give me a time frame on that and like what it's going to look like with these surveys that we're giving out to families?
It may not look at like a survey. It could be a Connect Ed message. It looks differently based upon the type of curriculum that we've invested in across the district. So you've heard me elevate various times in our board meetings over the last year and a half around new curriculum that we've purchased and are implementing for English language arts and mathematics across our elementary schools and middle schools. We have print resources that go along with each of those curricula. I would say, Gabe, for our high schools, it varies school to school based upon school investments and prior district investments. But in any instances where we do have print resources available for our students, we have asked our principals to engage their community with asking them that if they're interested in those resources that we have available, that they have an opportunity to pick them up.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I wanted to focus for a second on these new standards for screen time. So my first thing that's important to me is that these are made available to students, either via Canvas message or published on the CMS website. Because I think it's important that students are aware of these standards and they're aware of what the district's doing. Yeah.
I agree with you.
Okay.
100%.
Cool. And then the second comment I would make there is that I really hope that these standards are emphasizing the difference between asynchronous time and homework, because I think we've gotten to a blurry line there that's really been putting a lot of pressure on students.
We agree, and that's some of the feedback that Generation Nation has provided us, and we're acknowledging that. I can go back a slide here, but it's not just thinking about asynchronous and synchronous time, but it's just thinking about and being reflective of the type of assignments and how long our assignments take to actually complete, and being flexible with due dates, being flexible with that space to recognize that our families, as well as our teachers, we're dealing with a pandemic. And again, so just trying to reset, and homework is a big part of that conversation, Gabe, because in some instances that's increased screen time, as you know, and so that will be addressed in that public-facing guidance.
Thank you. And the third thing I'll say, being a user on the interface myself and hearing a lot of people talk about it, is that I think we need some consistency with how Canvas presents announcements, homeworks, modules, and things like that, because a lot of times there's lots of teachers that have various ways of presenting those things. So if we could have some guidance to make that consistent, that would be especially helpful as well.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to talk about, you mentioned last week through Generation Nation, where the superintendent and a number of staff met with students. We heard a lot of feedback, and the overwhelming response there was especially about SEL time. And we had a massive response saying that, quite frankly, it's not effective for students. Especially, it's a little ironic, right, where we're trying to account for students' mental health, and the most effective way to do that might very well be to reduce the screen time, which SEL is on a screen. And I don't doubt that there's wonderful intentions there, and there's wonderful intentions of getting crucial information, especially along the lines of social justice, to students there. But I think what we would really need from students and teachers especially is either a way to just opt in to this SEL time, or B, a way to make sure that it's happening only on one specific day of the week, right? So that it's not such an overwhelming time, and that time can be used as a break for students, especially since I'm hearing a lot of things about students who have to cook lunch for siblings who don't have a long enough break. And so I think we can hit two birds with one stone here if we just make a better use of that time.
I appreciate the feedback. We're certainly evaluating the use of the advisory time and the social emotional learning time across the district. What I would also say is that we haven't done that before either. It's new. It's an intentional approach of carving out sacred time for our children, our students, our young adults to access our teachers in new and meaningful ways. We have a high school curriculum that we've invested in for this space that will be arriving here in the second quarter, which arrives, I think, just after October 16th. So that should provide a little bit more structure and guidance into that space. We're also listening to our school leadership and our students with feedback that Gabe just provided to figure out ways to make it more meaningful. What I would share with you is because we haven't been conditioned to access that type of space, sometimes many of our students and many of our teachers don't understand just yet how we can be utilizing that, or that we have a space to be able to access people in those ways. And it's really important that we figure out ways to commit and double down on that particular strategy, but also make it more meaningful at the same time for our students. So Gabe, I want to acknowledge that we've heard your feedback as well as from some of our other students, but we need to figure out ways to partner to work out to make it more meaningful moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And one last question that I also think is important. You mentioned the need to be creative and to address the complexities when we're talking about teaching in a Plan B setting, right? Where teachers are dealing with in-person, remote, and full remote academy kids at the same time.
Yep.
And I think creativity and complexity is important, but we also need to have consistency as well. So I was wondering what kind of specific guidance are we giving to teachers to deal with students in all three of those scenarios, especially in cases where you might have limited teachers in one department?
Well, the consistency in the experiences are some of the things that we've outlined here tonight, right? But it's just acknowledging as we think about moving forward, it's really going to have a case-by-case, school-by-school scenario in terms of how teachers are partnering and identifying ways to meet those needs of supporting students both remotely as well as in person. And what I can share with you is we've heard from our community since last spring loud and clear that as a result of going into a remote learning stance, that our families, our students, our communities, as well as our teachers want something that's consistent and they want something that's predictable. But we're also now trying to balance that with being responsive to the feedback that we are receiving in the scenarios that our students and our teachers are in as a result of thinking about the complexities of moving into a Plan B. And so, Gabe, as I shared with you, that may be team teaching, it could be co-teaching in some instances. We have enough staff to handle and be able to divide the responsibilities where these teachers are supporting in person, and these are the teachers that are going to be supporting the full remote academy. In other instances, and especially in our high schools, we may be dividing the use of the instructional period or the instructional block, where teachers are supporting different groups of students within the same block, as well as being able to free students up for asynchronous time in ways that they may not currently be experiencing. But it will look different by school based upon staffing.
And I think I'm glad you bring that up because I think there's a lot of important strategies that we do have an ability to implement by school, but I think it's important that we make sure that the resources that we're giving to each school are the same. And specifically in the case where at my school, we're talking about using webcams through parent-teacher organization money that's comes specifically from donations at the school. So I find that as a massive equity issue. So I think that in whatever scenario we're doing, we have to make sure that it's equitable and consistent across the board and that we're using strategies that aren't worsening an already bad disparity.
Don't disagree. Some schools don't need webcams to implement this well, so I think that's important to acknowledge. But it's also one of the reasons why our learning community superintendents are working so hard evaluating the various schedules of our schools with our principals right now to make sure that we are equitable in our approach.
But if we do have webcams, I think they should be across the district. Thank you.
Those are great questions. Thank you, Gabe. Everyone's
Thank
glad
you.
you're here. Mr. Strain.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair. And Brian, thank you. Always enjoy having you come and present. That there's no end to what we learn every time you stand before us and share your knowledge with us. So I appreciate that. And I thank you tremendously for this presentation that I initially thought was going to be very focused on Plan B, but is balanced between Plan B, which is both in-person learning, of course, and virtual learning, which will continue. And so one of the things that I was certainly looking for from this evening was how we're responding to feedback about our virtual learning environment. And this is tremendous, and I appreciate that. I think it's been asked before, but I think it's worth raising one more time. As much feedback as has been incorporated in here and responsiveness to that feedback, what sort of expectations should our students and parents have with regards to the incorporation of these changes? That, again, over the next couple of days, weeks, those sorts of things as you push this out and those sorts of things get adopted?
Yeah, so we want to make sure that our principals are taking the primary leadership role in setting the tone and expectations for how these things play out in their schools. But as I shared with you, we are committed to publicly releasing what those standards are for our entire community to be aware of. So we're in partnership with each other. It is our expectation that those standards will be implemented across our district, but they need to be done in a way that creates a smooth transition, not a hard pivot. But we want to make sure that if we're recognizing that we're, a few weeks from now and things haven't changed, that we are being responsive to that feedback as well. So I believe in confidence that we can see, a change in this experience in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. And
Very welcome.
again, I thank you for your responsiveness and the entire team's incorporation of that feedback, and look forward to really the continuous learning and improvement as we go.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Shipp?
Well, so much has been said, and I always in agreement with everything, and also your work, Brian Kingsley. It's always nice to have you come and talk to us and really take a look at the use of feedback to look at what changes are being made and how you really work with this piece in relationship to making sure all students throughout this district will get the kind of academic and social and emotional learning they need. In saying that, I want to say this is the work as we move to in-person and also look at where we've been with remote. I think it is important, as been said, that there's consistency in how we do this and the time it will take for teachers and staffs to transition into this, because this is the real work. This is the tough work. Looking at how schedules will be made to ensure there is that in-person learning going on, and it's smooth and it's good, and also the remote learning is going on at the same time. I'm glad to see the screen time was really being addressed here, because that's going to be important as we look at in-person and we have students at home and remote. What is that really going to look like? And I think this is the real work, and this is where preparation needs to happen in the schools, because I know those principals will be working hard to look at how they develop those schedules, because schedules have been made, I'm sure, already for A, B, and C. Now they're really looking at staffing and what that will look like. So this is the crucial work in order to look at in-person and remote, which they haven't had to do yet. So I think that we all need to be aware of that, and that families know that Plan B, moving to Plan B, is a really complex transition that is going to be challenging, but I know we can do it and have done it, but I think this is the work. So thank you for this piece and really looking at this in the way that you have, because this is what it's going to take. I do think they need some flexibility, like you have said, in how they look at whether they team teach or whether they use support staff, and high school will definitely not look like elementary school schedules, so there needs to be. But there's also that equity piece, as Gabe has mentioned, has always been a problem across the district, with schools having this and not having that, and doing this and not doing that. So I hope that we will see that consistency so that we do get the best in terms of instruction that we can get for all children across the district. And I think that is the real work here and the work that needs to be done. And I know you are just working through this and working through this so that we have that successful delivery of the program when we move from Plan C into Plan B.
I want to thank you for your kind words, but if I can, just for a second, I'd like to briefly acknowledge that there's no me or I in this effort, that I am an ambassador for an incredible team that is working around the clock in partnership with our school leaders, our teachers, as well as I am a colleague of incredible members across various departments of this district that are completely committed to our instructional core business, and I'm just honored to be a part of this work in this district with all of you, so thank you.
Right. And I just want to admit, print materials, this might be a little bit of equity issue, is when you say they have to request it. There will be some schools and some situations where they wouldn't know to request these materials. So, and I know some schools are already giving them out. I have heard from some principals who said they just had a delivery of books and things out to their students and manipulatives. So I hope that that will be looked at too, the equity in how they get print materials, manipulatives, and things that they need for those who really need it. And we know we have schools where that may be more of a concern than others.
We'll make sure that we have strong communications around that and adapt if necessary to make sure that our families have what they need to be successful.
Thank
Thank you.
All right, I have no questions. I just have one comment. I think to follow up on what Ms. Shipp said, that this is the work. And today's Wednesday. A lot of people wear red on Wednesdays. Red for Ed is a sign of respect and solidarity with our educators. And so I'm wearing red today. And this section here is about the student experience, but there is no student experience without teacher experience. And so I just want to say to the teachers out there that I see you, I love you, I respect you, and I'm just so incredibly grateful for how you all are rising to the occasion in these challenging times.
Well said.
So with that, let's move on to the next section, which is going to be staffing and supplemental report. And then after that section, we're going to get our recommendations. So we'll do the next section, stop for some quick breaks, and then we'll grand finale.
Thank you.
So we'll have our Chief of HR, Ms. Christine Pajot, come in and speak to us on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Brian, and thank you, board members, for this opportunity this evening to discuss our people, Team CMS. And thank you, Board Chair. That was such a great segue into being able to talk about our staff, because I want everyone who is listening and watching in to understand and know that we hear you, and we are here to support you in any way that we can. And I'm very excited to talk about, in fact, the first slide. We heard loud and clear, what can we do to support our staff who are going to be expected to come back to work during a Plan B when our students are transitioned back to the work site, but they have young children to take care of. And those young children it may not be the most appropriate place for them to stay at home when their parents are working. So we've heard you, and we are making an option available to our school-based staff who have K-8 children who are CMS students to be able to come on site daily during their period of remote learning to be supervised by other school-based staff. Now, again, this would apply to K-8 students only, and it has to be students who are enrolled at CMS. Parents will have the option to take their children to their assigned schools, or they may also opt to take their students to the school at which they work, provided the grade span is the same. So in other words, if a school-based staff member has a middle school student, then they can bring their child with them to their school so long as they also work at a middle school. Now, this full day option is offered only during the remote learning period. It's very important that we are not saying that this is a substitute for in-person instruction. These students are not going to be getting any type of enhanced services or face-to-face interaction with their regular teachers. It's simply providing a space where students can continue their remote learning in a supervised environment. Students will not participate in in-person learning with their teachers. And this supervision is not going to be provided as a before or after care option. So this is not childcare. At the sites where we do have ASEP and BSEP running, of course, those parents will be able to enroll those students in their sites. But again, this is something different, and the program will operate during the regular bell day, during the regular school. Now, I know that our staff are eagerly anticipating what expectations are going to be as we transition them back into the classrooms. It's clear that a successful transition of students back into our classrooms is going to rely incredibly on our awesome staff and their support and their dedication in allowing us to successfully pull off this transition. All of our EC staff and teachers have already been notified that at select programs that are listed on this slide, they will be required to report back to work on September 28th. That's a teacher work day, and again, that's specifically for the sites and programs that are listed on the slide. Generally speaking, all other teachers will report to their school buildings 2 weeks prior before their students return. Now, detailed information will be sent to all staff tomorrow, and it will go through detail with every type of position group so that each and every staff person understands what those expectations are going to be. Now, there are going to be some exceptions to the in-person work. As many of you know, we have approved several staff across the board, both in central office and who are school-based, to work at home due to high-risk conditions. So, for example, and I've skipped ahead a little bit to the second bullet, school-based employees who have received approval from HR to work remotely will be permitted to continue in that capacity at this time, we anticipate through December. So through December 31st of this year, people who have been approved for working remotely will be able to continue to do so. Now, there's some caveats to that. There are specific subsets of teachers, for example, EC teachers, who may be required to come on site to perform special services for students that require in-person services. So in other words, if your job requires that you come on site to perform these services, you would be expected to come on site to do that. However, for the most part, teachers and instructional support staff are our school counselors, school psychologists. If they are high risk and have been approved to work from home, again, they will be allowed to do that for the most part through the end of this calendar year. Now, teachers assigned to the full remote academy may also continue to work remotely, but that's going to depend upon the students to which they are assigned. So you've heard previously how some students some teachers are assigned to both students who are brick and mortar students coming physically on site to schools, and also those who are enrolled in the virtual academy. In instances where we have teachers who are only assigned to virtual academy students, then those teachers would have the opportunity to continue to work from home. Again, it's just dependent upon the students to which they are assigned. Ultimately, we would love to be able to provide that option for all teachers who are in the full remote academy, and HR is there to support principals in those staffing needs. But again, much of this is going to be driven and needs to be driven by student needs, especially those students who are returning for in-person services. Again, tomorrow morning, all staff can expect to receive an email that will outline very clearly what those expectations are, in addition to the resources that we have available and the support like the on-site daily option for students of school-based staff. Some of these supports also include the leaves that we've all heard about. So the FFCRA, an acronym that's been thrown around a lot lately, this is a federal version of leave that's been made available to employees who are impacted by COVID-19. So there's a number of different reasons why people may qualify to use this leave. It has to do with your being diagnosed with COVID-19, if you're quarantined or asked to isolate for COVID-19. It also applies if you're caring for someone who has been impacted by COVID-19. So if you also have childcare needs because your child's school has shut down or they're under remote learning and you need to take advantage of that leave, that's available for you as well. Now, this particular act provides up to 80 hours of paid sick leave, either at full or 2/3 pay. The biggest distinguishing factor between whether you get full pay or partial pay is whether the qualifying reason has to do with you or the employee, or if it has to do with someone that the employee is caring for. Now, the CMS local emergency leave is something that we have made available, and thank you to this board that implemented this provision earlier in the spring. Just earlier this month, we have made it available to all of our non-exempt employees for qualifying reasons. The primary purpose that we put this into place is to help support employees who may have reduced work hours due to COVID-19 and due to the situation where we have all of our students in remote learning, yet we have many positions who really can only effectively do their positions on site. So many of these employees have begun to use this leave earlier this month. It applies to hourly staff only, and you get up to 80 hours of paid leave. The up to 80 hours for this particular leave and the other that was mentioned previously depends upon an employee's work schedule. So if an employee is typically scheduled to work 40 hours per week, then the total number of hours that employee could use is 80. Rather, if the employee is scheduled to work 20 hours per week, then the total amount of hours available is 40. So again, this local emergency leave applies for a number of reasons that are very similar to what the federal leave provides. And this is very important, and we're going to include a summary and a review of what these leaves are and what staff may take advantage of when we share the work expectations with all staff tomorrow. It will also include information about our EAP, That's a very important resource. I mean, these can be very stressful times, and we understand that, and we want to make sure our employees understand and know the resources that are available to them. Not only is EAP there to provide counseling and support, there are also a number of other benefits that are available through that program, including reduced costs for childcare and other resources that could become very handy for our employees during this time. Now, the longer we stay in the current situation under Plan C, clearly it accelerates the conversation that we need to have around furloughs. But what I would really like to impress upon this board and for any of the staff who are listening is that the reason why we would ask for the authority to implement furloughs is so that we can actually offer our employees more protection than what we would otherwise be able to provide. The vast majority of our employees, actually let me take a step back. So what is a furlough? A furlough is not a separation of employment. That's first and foremost. We value our employees and we want to maintain that employment relationship for as long as we possibly can with all of our staff. But we understand that based on the circumstances, many of our staff have already experienced reduced hours, and some of them, although very few, may run out of work soon. Now, when we talk about furloughs, we can talk about partial furloughs, which means simply a reduction in work hours. So you might have someone that typically works 40 hours per week, but we're only able to provide them with approximately 30 hours per week. So even though they're not working their full schedule, they are faced with reduced hours. A full furlough would mean that an employee has absolutely 0 hours available to work. Fortunately, we are not anticipating the need to implement full furloughs. We don't have a crystal ball, but what I can tell you and what I know for a fact is happening every day, we are putting several thousands of employees to work in alternative or modified duties. It's been absolutely fantastic. From the CMS Eats at Home, to technology support, to inventory, to a number of other assignments, we've been able to successfully keep many of these employees who are at risk in a status that they would only be facing a partial furlough. Now, why a partial furlough? Well, it's important because we could continue to go along and just have employees work at their reduced hours. And then they can also use the local emergency leave to supplement and keep them in a fully paid status for a certain period of time, but that's going to run out. So clearly at some point these employees would be experiencing a financial impact. Well, by declaring a furlough, it would allow these employees who are benefit earning to make immediate changes to their health insurance benefit options. So say, for example, you have someone who has full family coverage and maybe they've selected a more expensive PPO plan. Well, now they're saying, look, I'm very thankful that I can work the hours that I do have, but this is causing a financial hardship for me. So maybe I want to go in there and I want to just drop my dental. I've already had my cleaning. I don't need dental. I can do without it. Or maybe I need to make changes where I need to make sure that my kids are still covered, but I'm going to just remove my spouse temporarily. Or perhaps I don't need to go with the coverage right now, and when things are more secure, I can go back and make those changes again. This is critically important because ordinarily employees do not have the opportunity to make changes to their health insurance status except during an open enrollment. Now, some of you may ask, well, open enrollment, if you've been watching, and we're going to start sending out communications about that soon, is next month. But any changes that you make during an open enrollment period are not effective until the following calendar year. So those changes won't be in effect till January. So in a way, even though furloughs are not a popular topic, and I know it causes concern among staff and the community and this board, we don't really want to go there, but by doing so and declaring partial furlough, we're actually providing additional benefit to our employees that they would not already have. With that said, there is another benefit that we could provide our employees by declaring partial furlough. It gives us a way to notify in a uniform way or in a mass way to unemployment officials that we have these many employment types that have been declared as partial furlough. This makes the process easier for those employees who are trying to get unemployment benefits because employees are eligible for unemployment when they experience reduced hours. And I know the big question is potential date. So again, we don't anticipate having to implement full furloughs anytime soon. I believe that we would still be weeks out from that point because I'm confident with the excellent work that our teams have pulled together to do from all of the department leaders and the different program heads that we will continue to be able to offer alternative or modified duties in the time in that gap before we transition students back into the classroom. However, when the time is appropriate, we would want the opportunity to declare partial furlough, again, so that we can give employees who are experiencing reduced hours at least a little bit more flexibility when it comes to their health insurance benefits. So with that said, I am happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you. So on the phone, Dr. Jones and Ms. Sawyer have both indicated to me that they don't have questions. Ms. Cheek?
I don't have any questions. Thank you for your explanations of everything.
Ms. De La Hara?
Just a couple quick ones. With the partial furlough, does that impact those who are affected, their years of service and like vested in the state system, or does that also allow them protection there?
So it would offer protection in terms of there being no break in service, and provided the employee is still earning a salary, then we would still be able to contribute. Only when we start to talk about full furlough is when an employee, of course, then would not be contributing towards that state retirement, and that would not allow CMS to be able to make those same contributions. Now, keep in mind, even if we don't declare furloughs, whether we do or we don't, employees who experience reduced hours, those earnings will count, towards their retirement, and that's figured in the calculation if they retire, let's say, in the next 4 years. But that's really not to the point of whether we implement furloughs or not.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to hear that. And also just very happy that you started off with the child full-day programming for the children of CMS teachers. So thank you.
Marshall?
One quick question on health insurance. So just to make sure, we are CMS, if a person is experiencing a partial furlough or a full furlough, CMS would still be contributing their part to the medical insurance benefits for that employee.
Yes, so organizations actually have a choice following the first month of furlough. So the good news is we don't anticipate that even if we had to go to furloughing, that we would have to do that for any extended period of time, but that employee would certainly be covered at least for that first month of the full furlough. However, an employee is always responsible for paying their portion of the premium.
Okay, and that's regardless of full-time or furlough?
Yes.
I am so thankful for this child of staff full-day programming. This is something I had talked about with you all some time, and I just think that we're not only school-based staff, bus drivers, any of our folks, and I'm just so thankful. I'm also thankful that it's K-8, because oftentimes those middle schoolers can kind of get left out. You know how that goes. So I appreciate that they are included in this and that they'll be at those schools, and I just think that's a great thing. I think this will help ease the mind of many of our staff. So I'm very thankful.
Well, and thank you for clarifying that school-based staff does mean bus drivers,
Yes.
cafeteria workers, any employee who works at a school site on day. So this is not just for teachers. We appreciate the work and understand the struggle that all of our parent employees are facing. So this opportunity is for all of them.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? You good, Margaret?
Good, I'm sorry, yes, all good.
All right.
This mask is affecting my ears.
Thank you. I'm really appreciative of what you're doing for the staff in this proposal, particularly the staff who are looking for some relief and confidence that their children are going to be taken care of when they're coming back to work. I'm wearing red for Ed as well, but thank you.
Okay. Mr. Schul?
I'm all good. Thank you for the presentation.
Mr. Strain?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of questions about the Children's Staff Services. Can you walk through the discussion points around K-5 versus K-8?
In terms of why we would offer it to K-8?
The decision around offering fully through 8th grade as opposed to through 5th grade.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, by combining our different technology systems, we were able to get a good estimate of how many students that this might impact. And of course, we know that all employees might not take advantage of this option, but we still figured, I don't want to say worst case scenario, but the maximum number of students that we believed we could accommodate, because of course social distancing still applies, and we need to make sure that we have adequate space to be able to do this at each and every school site. In doing so, and in hearing the comments and feedback that we've gotten from staff since we announced gosh, even before we started talking about our current plan, but when there was a potential to go to a Plan B much earlier, we had an outpouring of feedback from our staff saying, please don't limit it to K-5. Please, I do have middle schoolers, as Ms. Marshall suggested, that I'm not so comfortable leaving at home, so what are you going to do for me? And because we are in a position to make this available, then we should. So that's why we did that, and it seemed like a logical cutoff to take it all the way through 8th grade, as opposed to then offering it to high school as well, because for the most part, we feel confident, and we didn't hear much feedback about saying we want this option for our high schoolers.
Yeah, so whilst I don't certainly subscribe to the just because you can, you should in all circumstances, I certainly agree here. There are a number of companies that are working through this very difficult period, making services available to staff that they wouldn't have done previously. And I think this is something that we can do to ease the burden on our staff in terms of a return to the classroom for our students, which is what we're trying to achieve here in a student focus. So speaking of that, can you talk me through the reasoning behind doing this just for school-based staff versus all of our staff that need to report to duty at whatever their place of work is?
Well, generally speaking, we've had central office staff and other staff who have been working in our school building since June. So that's nothing new, and they've been able to manage. We've gotten some feedback, but really the tremendous need that we've heard and that we felt compelled to respond to was from our school-based staff, because we still have central office and some district level positions that would still have the flexibility because of their position to be able to work remotely, whereas school-based staff, they just don't have that. And I want to clear up any misconception right now. I think I started to touch on that by saying that we do have central office staff and district staff who have been working on site daily since June. Has that applied across the board? No. And how do we make that decision? Is it us arbitrarily making decisions to favor some people over others? No, that's absolutely not the case. What we need to do to make sure that we handle that equitably is look at what a person's job entails. So take teachers, for example. Teachers have been provided the opportunity and flexibility to work remotely because their students right now, all of them, are in a remote environment. So it makes sense to be able to do that, and we can provide that flexibility. Now that we are transitioning students back into the classroom, the vast majority of our teachers will have to transition back because most of our students have opted for in-person learning. Even though we have several who have opted for the remote academy, we are still going to have to bring back great numbers of our staff in order to accommodate and serve those students who are coming into our school buildings. That's not so much the case for central office, and I can give you a contrasting example. Take a technology analyst, for example. A technology analyst position never has to interact face-to-face with students or staff or family members. They pretty much spend most of their day on a computer where they can do that function from home. So it's much different from positions that require boots on the ground and the need to be able to serve our families who are coming back into our buildings. So really, Mr. Strain, it's just because the greatest need is for our school-based staff, and we've been able to manage effectively and have not had that same feedback from our non-school-based staff.
I would certainly argue that the exact same need exists for any of our staff, which is required to be on site. So I would respectfully request that you consider that. Whilst it hasn't been asked for at the same volume as, for example, teachers, it made all the sense in the world that when we said we're planning on bringing students back to classes and teachers are going to have to come back to the classrooms, that's the voice we would hear the loudest. But that the exact same requirement exists for any of our staff who are required to be on site, that they may have children as well, and they have worked through all the accommodations for those. But if we're going to make accommodations for others, then I think we should probably make accommodations for them as well.
Absolutely, and what I can tell you is I can commit to our team looking at that, but our first priority was to look at school-based staff because we knew that was going to be an immediate need, especially once those students transitioned back on site. So we will absolutely look at that. We are happy and will continue to provide flexible options for our employees, whether they're district, central office, school-based. That's just our job. We feel like we need to do that in HR, and we will commit to doing that.
what sort of planning has been done around space requirements for this? We know that we have buildings that are tremendously overcrowded normally. We know that, we've had various, depending upon school and others, how many folks have taken up FRA, et cetera. That doesn't really change the number of classrooms we're going to have to use substantially, because those numbers and the reductions of numbers are being driven both by FRA take-up, reduced enrollment, splitting the on-site students into A, B, and C groups, et cetera. But that drives the social distancing, which means a much lower efficiency in terms of our use of our space. So how much work has been done to ensure that we can offer this given the space that we have?
So each principal is responsible for evaluating his or her work site to be able to determine the best place to be able to provide these services. And when you look at it globally, it's interesting because the maximum impact at some schools is so low, it's in the single digits, and in other schools, it can go into the double digits. So it really varies in terms of the number of students who may take advantage of this at any particular school, which is another reason why we needed to be cautious and open it up to just school-based staff only at first until we evaluate the needs in the space to know whether we can expand it further. So it really is a principal by principal decision. I can tell you that some areas that have already been identified would be the media center, or portions of the cafeteria, or really any other space that would be suitable for that type of learning, and it will be highly dependent upon the number of staff who sign up for that. And that's why, please, any staff who is listening and interested in this opportunity, please be on the lookout for a survey that will also accompany shortly after the work expectations that are sent out, because your principals are going to be asking you questions that are going to be critical to our staffing of our schools. And those questions will also include whether or not you intend to take advantage of the on-site daily option, and if you're going to do that at your child's assigned school, or if you're going to do that at another school. That will be able to get us to the heart of what you're asking, Mr. Strain, for each principal to be able to identify a suitable space to be able to make this happen.
I'm glad you mentioned the option of assigned school or with the parent, right, at that work location. Will transportation be provided for this service then?
So it will not. As much as we wanted to make this the complete package, we are just limited in our capacity in order to make that type of system work, especially when we're giving teachers the option to take their children to their assigned schools or to their home schools. But we think that by adding that option of bringing them with them to their own schools, that it will provide some relief. And I do want to mention, I shared a caveat to bringing your child to your own school, that it has to be within the same grade span. I want to ensure our EC teachers and our pre-K teachers who could be called to come back earlier, and in the case of EC, they will be coming back earlier, that exception or that caveat will not apply until all of our schools are open. So those EC teachers may bring their students with them to their site, even if the grade span is not a match.
And the 2 weeks, so I know there's been some discussion of staff reporting 2 weeks prior than the students report to a school as we reopen the school for in-classroom instruction. Would the same apply for students then, that this option would be available during that same period?
Yes, so the option, the benefit becomes available to employees who want to take advantage of this, and it would be effective the day that they are expected to come to work on site. But it would still only apply to the periods of time that their children are in remote learning.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So a couple questions on furloughs. Is there a list of job classifications that would be the earliest risk that you think for
We
partial
do.
furloughs?
We do have a list that's identified, and I'm happy to share that with you following the meeting. I don't have it with me here tonight, but we do have that identified.
And would you anticipate that we would issue fewer furloughs if we adopted an accelerated transition to Plan B?
So the answer to that is a little bit complicated, because I'm going to flip the question on you a little bit, if I can.
Sure.
I don't think at this point that we're going to have to implement full furloughs at all, because I still think that we're several weeks out for that. And I think those employees are at less risk because there are still multiple modules of mandatory training, for example, that we could provide these staff to at least get them working some level of hours. Now, with that said, the furloughs that we would likely implement first would be partial. And we would really want to implement those sooner rather than later so that we can give those employees what we talked about earlier, the benefit, the option to be able to make changes to their health insurance premium. So I think that would be accelerated in any case because we would want to do that to be able to put more power in the hands of our employees.
So, yeah, so presumably that would happen soon.
Yeah, that could have happened already, yet the staff and the superintendent do not have the authority without this board's grace and permission to be able to implement furloughs.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Ms. Ship?
I want to say thank you so much for this. Early on, as we looked at this was one of my big hot buttons. How are we going to support staff with some daycare issues? And I think I talked about this a lot. Could we have them come to school when they were in the remote with their parent? So I think that this is great, and I want to thank you for the work that you've put into this, making this happen. How are we looking at who will be supervising these children? And after-school enrichment, I know that there's staff out there that's probably not, that still need to look at the work for them. How would they figure into this? After-school enrichment teachers we've had before school and after-school programs, how does that look in line with this and how the staff's children would be supervised?
So the staffing is going to be managed by the principal at each site, using the existing staff who are reporting daily to that school, in addition to staff who may still be looking for alternative or modified work duties. So that's another way to answer Mr. Strain's question, that we can continue to keep employees employed by doing these other duties now that are associated or with programs that we've put in place due to the pandemic and due to supports that we're providing to our staff. So it could be a number of staff who are covering. It could be non-instructional support staff. It could be instructional support staff. Again, a number of ways that a principal can manage that staffing. And the reason why we say the principal needs to really be in control of that is because the principal knows, right, boots on the ground, what is happening in his or her school building and who is available to take those shifts. And I say shifts because it's likely that employees will rotate in terms of providing that coverage for the students at each site.
And we know, and I think we need to make that clear, that pre-K is a whole different ballgame. So when parents come back, when they bring their kids back to school, pre-K was never in, because of daycare laws, in our after-school enrichment programs. They were not able to be in there, and they had to have other daycare situations for our pre-K students. And also, how would that work with the pre-K staff who had pre-K children?
So I would love to defer to my colleagues, Brian Kingsley and others, to discuss the actual child care and pre-K and before care and after care. This program specifically, I want to make sure that we make it clear that this is simply, it's like a learning lab. It's a safe space for students to be able to come and engage in their remote instruction. It is not instruction that's provided face-to-face by their regular teachers. Rather, it is truly like a lab. I believe even Union County, who is doing something similar, is calling it a lab for students to be able to come in, and it only applies to students who are in K through 8. It does not include pre-K.
And I think that's clear for everybody to know exactly what it's going to be and what it looks like. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. I have no questions, just to say I too am relieved that you figured out a way to offer childcare for school-based staff, and concerned about furloughs.
Thank you.
So next, the moment we've all been waiting for, let's move on to the recommendations for the transition to Plan B.
Superintendent Winston will turn this over to you at this point in time.
Thank you, Dr. Hayes. Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. You all have received lots of information tonight. I think that's the understatement of the evening. So what I'd like to do is just spend a few moments to sort of recap what the two specific recommendations are this evening. The first recommendation is to seek board approval to authorize the transition to Plan B, beginning with Phase 1. And when we get to the next slide, I can talk about specifically the dates, et cetera, associated with Plan B. The second recommendation, as Ms. Peugeot just explained momentarily a few moments ago, is to authorize myself to have the ability to implement furloughs, should we need to do so. So those are the two specific recommendations and the two action items on the agenda. Next slide, please. So in this slide, you will see specific dates attached to the different phases. And as Ms. Peugeot explained earlier, teachers will return 2 weeks prior to students returning in that particular rotation. They'll return to their buildings 2 weeks prior to students returning. So if we start with September 29th, the recommendation is to have our pre-K students return on October 12th, which means our teachers would return September 29th for our pre-K students. Secondly, in Phase 2, we're proposing that our kindergartners through 5th grade students return. That phase begins on November the 2nd. Moving on to Phase 3, which includes our middle school students, 6th through 8th graders. The recommendation is that they begin in-person learning beginning November the 23rd. And last but not least, our high school students. We are recommending that they begin on December the 14th. Now, here's the caveat for our high school students. They would come in the week of December 14th for high school end of course assessments. And that would happen the following week as well. You also see a date on the calendar, January the 5th. So our high school students would begin in-person instruction on January 5th. Now, I will tell you that scheduling is a big issue with our high school students, so starting them in their rotation at the beginning of second semester does not alter their schedule. So I also want to highlight the fact that in Plan B, with the exception of our pre-K students, so our pre-K students will return for in-person learning if this plan is approved on October the 12th, and whereas other students would have a week on in person and 2 weeks for remote learning, our pre-K students will remain in the building. So there is no 1 week on for in-person, 2 weeks off. They will remain in the building. So I wanted to highlight those things, and I'm happy to take any questions about the recommendations, the two recommendations that I have just shared.
All right, so let me start with, on the phone, Dr. Jones, do you have any questions?
Not at this time.
Ms. Sawyer?
Not at this time. I'm pleased with the amazing work that staff have done to create a path that meets the needs of our student, staff, and families. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Shipp? Any questions?
Not at this time.
Mr. Strain, do you have any questions at this time?
I have a lot of questions. I'm not sure where you want those questions to be placed, to be honest.
in the flow of things there.
Right. Well, so we'll just do a quick round of clarification questions, and then we'll go to a motion, and then we can have discussion and debate, so.
Okay. I'm good.
Okay. Mr. Shul?
Not at this time.
Ms. Byers-Bailey?
Thank you. The only comment I want to make is I'm glad that the high school end of grade testing, or end of course testing is identified as is occurring during the December 14th session, so that it indicates that that's the end of their first semester.
Ms. Marshall?
I want to, two things in terms of clarifying. The pre-K students, that excludes the Montessori pre-K. So the Montessori pre-K, I'm assuming, then goes back in with the schedule of the K-5, correct?
That is correct.
The high school EOC testing, I think the state is still debating on whether or not that will occur in buildings or remote. Is that correct?
That is correct. At this point in time, we have not received any other guidance other than EOC testing will need to be taken in person inside the school facilities.
Now, the EOC testing, that's for all high school classes, or those ones, there are 4 classes?
Yes, ma'am. There's 4 classes.
That would be Math 2. Could you go over those?
Yeah, that'd be Math 1, Math 3. You would have English 2, and then you would also have biology.
Okay, so we can revisit whatever the situation is for high school exams. That's a little trickier. Okay, thank you.
I don't have any questions.
And Ms. Chi?
I have no questions. I'll save my comments for after the motions.
All right. Okay. So the first action item is the superintendent's recommendation for approval of the transition plan for in-person and remote instruction, Plan B. I turn to Board Member Lenora Shipp to make this motion.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the CMS transition plan for in-person and remote instruction, Plan B, as recommended by the superintendent. The transition plan phases are as follows. October the 12th, 2020, for pre-K students, except students enrolled in the Montessori pre-K program. November 2nd, 2020, for students in Montessori pre-K kindergarten and grades 1 through 5. November 23rd, 2020, for students in grades 6 through 8. January 5th, 2021, for students in grades 9 through 12. Students in grades 9 through 12 will have in-person testing times beginning the week of December 14th, 2020. As part of this plan, students will be separated into 3 groups per school and will attend school on a rotation of in-person and remote learning as outlined in the school calendar previously approved by the board on July 15th, 2020. Additionally, this plan will continue to adhere to the guidelines of the remote learning plan previously approved by this board on July 15th, 2020.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor from Ms. Shipp, a second from Ms. Byers-Bailey. Ms. Shipp, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes. I believe that this plan and the way that it will be phased in is a good, smooth, effective, efficient phase-in, especially as we look at first quarter is just about to end. And the teaching and learning and the grading and the transition for students need to be smooth. And students have had a lot with the remote learning. And I would hope that we would have time to ensure also that the grading and what needs to happen at the end of the remote for first quarter would be there. And that time will be good as we begin to phase into Plan B for in-person and remote. So I do think that this is a good time frame as we start with pre-K, October the 12th, and then move all the way through with our high schoolers.
All right, thank you. So for discussion, I'm now going to turn to Ms. Sawyer on the phone. Do you have anything to add to the discussion or debate, Ms. Sawyer?
Yes, I would just like to add, as a reminder, that while we are laying out a plan, that plan, it's the continued success of that plan depends upon the community metrics and the health of our staff and the health of our students. So this is not a plan that is inviolate. It will change if conditions change. I hope that they won't. I hope that our public health metrics remain strong and get stronger. But we will be reviewing these on a regular basis. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Strain?
I had more questions than statements, but I'll try and summarize in statements, I guess. You know, this is done in the context of a global pandemic, and it is interesting. I'm kind of called back to the three things that our superintendent challenged us with, or stated up front, which I've tried to incorporate through this process this evening: caution, courage, and compassion. You know, the medical and community health has improved markedly since we had these conversations in the middle of July. In fact, very steadily since the 15th of July, week on week, we've seen those improve. And so as I look at that and take into account the fact that time and again, we know, we are told, but we know in this group as well, that teaching and learning takes place best in our classrooms. And that our students are impacted across the board by continued remote learning, but some more so than others, and we've talked about that a bit tonight. We've talked about the inequity of remote learning. And so that drives a bit of urgency around action, or should do. And as I look at this proposed plan, I don't see that urgency, which brings me to courage. And I ask the question, where? There's a big difference between recklessness and measured risk and reward. The risk has been, certainly at this point with our current medical and community health stats, has been overstated at this point. The reward has been understated of in-person instruction. And the case for continuing the mandated remote learning hasn't been made. And so I look at this and I think to myself, why aren't we putting these kids back in our classrooms as soon as possible? It's not reckless. It's not only responsible, but it's necessary. And then I'm drawn back to that word compassion. And I was struck by the joint statement tonight by several of our colleagues on the City Council, encouraging us to think hard about our core focus, what's best for students, and really think about that compassion. And what's interesting about that is it's not only
our colleagues on the city council who are very concerned, as we are, with our students, particularly the most vulnerable among them. But it's not just that encouragement to be bold and courageous from our partners on the city council, but it's the state law. The state law says we can continue mandated remote learning where it is needed to ensure the health and safety of students. That's the state law. And so I struggle with how this represents those things, the recognition that we are doing further damage to our kids by keeping them out of in-person instruction unnecessarily. And the questions that I have really boil down to why. Because we've talked previously about a phased implementation, and that phased implementation had to do with learning within a school. But this recommendation, for all of the right reasons in terms of putting the students back into the school in a rotational basis, but all of the school at once instead of one grade at a time. There's no lessons to be learned between schools. And so there's no justification for delaying elementary school after pre-K, for middle school after elementary school, for high school after our middle schoolers, because there's not lessons to be learned through that phased implementation. There's no constraints there. And so I have yet to hear a coherent and reasoned argument for why we would continue to subject our kids to the dangers that we've been told time and time and time again are associated with continued remote learning unnecessarily. I'll leave it at that because I'm not sure there's any answers to those questions.
Mr. Schul?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think it's absolutely necessary that we do have to support this plan, and we've been trying to get here for quite a while. Because the fact of the matter is that we do need to get kids back in school, but we do need to do so with an approach that is measured and that is cautious. And the fact is that there are clear reasons for why we should phase. I think the most obvious one to me is the fact that we're dealing with much smaller populations when we're looking at elementary schools as compared to middle and high schools. And furthermore, we're dealing with populations that need to be prioritized in the first place for that in-person learning. So when we do move forward, I think this is the smartest way to do it, because we're doing so in a way in which we're assessing each school, we're assessing county metrics, and we're basing it off of data. Now, that being said, I hope that our execution reflects that same measure and same wariness for our staff, students, and families. And also, I think that we've heard a lot about the importance of teacher and educator feedback today. And that's especially important because a lot of times I think we fall susceptible to a narrative that we can control everything from high up, right? And that we can do everything and implement policies that are going to work across the board, when the fact is that we have schools, teachers, students, families that are completely different from one another. And that doesn't mean that we take an approach that is not consistent, right? I think what a lot of students are missing right now is an approach which gives them consistency, which can give them faith in their school system, faith in their classes. I think what students are expecting from this plan is one that takes into account their thoughts and feelings, especially on the lines of mental health and along the lines of what screen time is doing to kids right now, so that when we move forward, we understand that less screen time is certainly going to be the best thing for mental health going forward. And we understand for teachers that we give enough guidance so that they're not scrambling to come up with lessons, that they're not scrambling to deal with 3 different types of groups, teaching groups at the same time. So that being said, I don't want to go too long here, because I think that if what we can learn from today is that there has had been a ton of work go into this, and for very good reasons, because we cannot go into this in a way in which we're throwing massive populations of students into school buildings. We need to do so in a way that is assessing metrics, and we need to do so that is continually adapting to a changing environment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Byers-Bailey, do you have anything to add to the discussion?
I would just like to thank the staff and the community, the teachers, the students, for all the equity committee and everybody else that has had a voice at the table to share their thoughts and concerns regarding how we come back to school. I think this is a plan that has listened to two different communities or opinions within our community. One that has been pounding the table saying we needed to go back to school 2 months ago, and the other who are shaking in their boots saying, no, not yet, no, not yet, no, not yet. I think this plan gives both groups, both camps, an opportunity to move into this new phase of our education with measure and caution and an opportunity to reassess, readjust their attitude toward what we're about to do. And I'm truly grateful to our staff for taking the time to listen to everyone and to spend the time to come up with a plan that I think will work.
Ms. Marshall?
You know, you can hear my colleagues have differing opinions, and our community has differing opinions. And I think someone said earlier, a third of folks may like this, a third of folks may hate this, a third of folks may be in the middle. And that's probably sort of where things are. And I think to that point, many times any decision we make is going to be dismissed by a large quantity of people. We're not here to make everybody happy. That's a fact. I think I often get comments about take politics out. I'm like, well, if you were all about politics, being on the school board right now is probably about the worst place you could be. So for me, I've struggled with this, and I'm going to be quite honest. I'm going to go back to my vote on July 15th, where I indicated that I felt like we needed more time, that it was not the right time to go back. And I still do believe that. We had a community positivity rate that was north of 10%, almost 11%. We were at our peak. You don't know if you're at your peak until you've passed it. But like others have mentioned, I'm very thankful that our community rates of infection have been going down. I think that mask wearing and the social distancing are very important. And I know that when we go back, we are going to experience cases. I want to make sure we have everything possibly that we can do to prevent stops and starts. But what I was hoping to see, because my vote in July was to give us more time to prepare, which I think that we have. I'm very appreciative of all the work that's gone into the academic side, into the operations side to get us to this point. While I know that we've had a lot of concern about remote learning, I do believe that very quickly we're going to see some transition. I am concerned about when we go back and teachers are teaching to a variety of folks, whether they've been in front of them or remotely. That's going to be a struggle any way we slice it. But what I felt like is that we had given enough time, and I had hoped that by October 19th we would begin this process and have students walking in our buildings. And I also had hopes that this transition period would be shorter. So it's with a heavy heart. I do want students to go back in some form or fashion, but I cannot support right now this particular calendar of recommendation because I do think it should be sped up and condensed. I think that we will still accomplish the goals of keeping folks safe because we have divided people up into 3 groups. And I think that the precautions that we've taken in our buildings will be a great thing. And I think that we will be prepared by that time. So I think Team CMS could do this. But I also appreciate that there are a variety of opinions about this. And there are people at home that are probably not liking what I'm saying, people that may be. And that's just the way it's going to be right now. There's nothing we can, if anything was easy, we would have already done it. So I thank our staff for all the work they do and all the work they continue to do. As for the reasons I spoke earlier, I will not be able to support this particular calendar, but I do look forward to the day when our students walk back into the buildings. I know that many staff have communicated with me that they are very excited about that. Other staff have communicated other things. It's just like everything. We all have different opinions, different feelings about this, and different levels of confidence. And I appreciate that. I'm not going to dismiss anyone's feelings about this. My feelings are that we should start earlier and compress the schedule. So I thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me speak.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Ms. De La Hara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just want to acknowledge the just enormous undertaking. I think we've mentioned this a few times tonight, and I'm just going to put that with a couple dates because I think it's important for us to remember, particularly for those who think we started working on the details of the plan tonight, back in March. And so to clarify that a little bit, on June 8th, we received information from the state to start to guide us on these 3 potential plans. And then on July 14th, we received information from the governor on either B or C, giving us further direction on where we could go. I know we made our vote, and then even as early as August 20th, we had simultaneously directed the district to both. We were going into our Plan C, but we needed to be working on a Plan B. And the very initial thoughts were put out, on August 20th of here's our initial thinking, and we're going to go back and vet with principals and teachers and get feedback, which is what was described tonight. So I just think that's important for us to understand how complicated all of this is and all these different steps that's taken us to get to where we are. I think we've made great strides, both as a district and in our community. I know back in July at our meeting, we didn't have all of our PPE in. We had, concerns and questions about our staffing, whole transportation teams that were having to be out on quarantine because they had been exposed, and how that would impact us if 10 people go out at one time, and things that we had to work through operationally to make sure we were ready, making sure we had our subs lined up. And there were so many factors. And tonight we saw, and we've been getting updates through the metrics committee meeting of how we are overcoming our HR challenges, our, making sure we have all our PPE in, et cetera. And so I'm feeling really great about how many obstacles we've overcome and how that changes things. Simultaneously, as a community, we're doing pretty well with our infection rate numbers and case rate numbers. We're going down, certainly almost cut in half from where we were in July, but that's still a tricky number. And I think it's important that we all remember that, because while we may set forth and hopefully we continue as a community to do well and our number goes down, this is not set in stone, in the sense that this doesn't mean that we can't come back 2 weeks from now if we have a huge uptick and change this all together, because the metrics informs staff, that informs us that these would be the necessary recommended changes. So I do think it's important that we understand that the community understands that, because it's not just all on us as the district. We've done our part, I think. I just commend the staff. I can't commend them enough for how much work that we're doing. But we all have to do what was referenced tonight. Dr. Cohen mentioned, I think Ms. Cheek mentioned it again, wear a mask, wash our hands, wait, and social distance. And I do think it's important to reiterate that, because it's kind of just shocking to me that we're here continuing to talk about that, and we can't ignore that we have leaders in our country, in our state, and even here locally, who seem to not even think that that matters. And so I would call us all higher and continue to call us higher to really think about what we're doing and the kind of people that we need that are going to follow these 3 simple rules that we're now trying to turn around and look to our staff, look to our kids and say, do these 3 W's, right? So, I think that I'm glad that the time is spaced out because we're on the right trajectories. We have been told tonight, I know there are 24 more buildings. The question has come up, well, why can't we do it sooner? Well, as we learned tonight, there are 24 buildings, I believe, I hope I've got that right, that the information hasn't been turned in. I looked to that calendar and I know and I heard that confirmed that we will have all of those, the checklist done by that point. That gives me confidence to know that with this time frame in mind, not a rush time frame, but with this time frame in mind, we can make sure that we have all of the challenges that we have. If staff is coming to me and saying that this is what they've worked out, works for our whole district, then I'm not going to question that and put back on them, well, I think we need to move it up forward. There are reasons why, and when some of that came up in our smaller group discussion today. So I am going to support this, this plan with this time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cheek, you get the last word.
All right, great. I do support returning students to in-person learning. I've been a vocal supporter of that for some time. Back in July, I abstained because I thought staff had done so much work to get us to Plan B, but I did understand where my colleagues were coming from that were afraid that the data wasn't there. We were at 11.3% positivity rate. All of our numbers, I think we were around in the 200 level versus 49 per 100,000. And our numbers since then have continued to drop. One of my colleagues even asked me around that time, did I think we were near peak? And I said, I think we're about a week away from peak, and darned if the numbers didn't pretty much hit right where I thought they would. And they've been pretty steadily coming down ever since. This timeline is not what I wanted. I want our kids back in classes. I thought October 19th was the most reasonable time to do that because that is the beginning of the second quarter. It's a reset for kids. It's a reset to be reorganized. Based on our dashboard, we could go back Monday the 21st of September, because we're in the yellow on all the things that we said that were important to us. Under 6% positivity. All of the numbers are in the yellow. There is not an easy solution, as Ms. Marshall said. Each choice that we could make faces challenges. We are getting emails continuously from parents that want us to stay in full remote, that want us to go back tomorrow, that want us to go back next week. I don't know. There's some that I just don't think they ever want to go back, period. And it's across the board in this community. Our most fragile students, I think, are our elementary, and I really did want to get them back sooner. This does not diminish my appreciation for staff and the work that has gone into this and the creativity behind many of the plans. This is not being dismissive to the fear and the anxiety of staff that will be coming into our buildings. I understand and have lived through some of that anxiety as I return to the workplace on March the 17th to work in a COVID environment without PPE and without a whole lot of knowledge about the disease and the pandemic when I had to return to work on March 17th. I have asked for us to put forth a return to school plan, and this is it, but unfortunately it is not what I expected, and much of the rationale that I have heard based on why we're doing this was not because of things that were in that dashboard and readiness issues. So for that reason, my vote will not be supporting this version of a return to school plan. I wish that there were support on this board to make a substitute motion to accelerate the timeline, but I explored that option today and did not find that to be a fruitful use of our time to put forth a substitute motion to change the timeline. Thank you.
All right, thank you, colleagues. So the calling for the vote will be a little different tonight because we have 2 members joining us electronically and the rest of us are in the room. So I'm going to begin by going to Ms. Sawyer. If you could just say, how say you?
I vote yes.
Okay. Dr. Jones, how say you?
I vote yes.
All right. And so for the rest of us in the room, all of those in favor of Ms. Shipp's motion, please let it be known by raising your hands. Okay, so that was 1, 2 on the phone, 3, 4, 5, 6. And all those opposed, please let it be known by raising your hands. All right, so Madam Clerk, the motion passes by 6 to 3. Next, we will, the final action tonight is the recommendation to authorize the superintendent to implement furloughs if necessary. And for this, I turn to Board Member Jennifer De La Hara to make the motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we grant the superintendent the authority to furlough non-exempt employees as needed based on the criteria recommended by the superintendent. This may include full and partial furloughs. Employees may not be furloughed before September 21st, 2020. Additionally, the furlough authority granted to the superintendent is temporary and will expire on June 1st, 2021.
All right, we have a motion from Ms. De La Hara. Is there a second?
A second.
All right, second from Ms. Byers-Bailey. Ms. De La Hara, would you like to speak to your motion?
Maybe just briefly that I'm glad that the work has been put in from our HR staff and other staff to make this option available, to think through how minimally our employees could be impacted. You know, we many times don't think about those small changes like that may be presented to a family, that you switch your health care plan and maybe drop off dental or do a higher deductible or whatnot to save money. But those things matter. And I think it's also, as a side note, a testament of why our healthcare system should not be tied to our employers. But that's another conversation for another day. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Jones, do you have anything to add to the discussion?
Not at this time.
Okay. Oh, I see that now. And Ms. Sawyer, I see that you do not either. All right. I will come back around the other way now. Ms. Cheek, do you have anything to add? Ms. Marshall? Ms. Byers-Bailey?
No.
Mr. Schul?
I just want to say that I support this motion, but out of pure necessity. I think that that's something that needs to be said because I don't support the narrative that this is something that's going to be net beneficial for our workers. I think we have to just come to terms with that we are indeed creating a place of financial hardship for a lot of people. And that's out of pure necessity, you know, and that's because of the trying times that we're in. But I just think it's important to note that this is a hard decision, and it's not one that should ever have been made without the circumstances.
Mr. Strain?
No comment.
Ms. Shipp?
No comment.
Okay, well, I'm going to say what Mr. Schul said.
That's why I said.
All right. So now I'm going to call on Dr. Jones for your vote.
I vote yes.
And Ms. Sawyer?
I vote yes.
All right. Ms. Shipp? Or, I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm
the
going to
rest
go.
of us
All
go
those in favor of the motion, please let it be known by a show of hands. Do we have any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Before we adjourn, I'm going to turn to Mr. Superintendent for one more comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to all board members. I want to first thank the board for the 2 votes. The first being the transition to Plan B for in-person phased-in learning, and then the second vote approving authorization for granting staff to implement furloughs. And I also want to say that I completely understand our board members and members of our public who want us to move with greater speed. I completely get it. There are no wrong or right viewpoints in this challenging decision. So I completely get it. I also understand the need to take a prudent approach. And by that, I mean gradually introducing students and staff in limited numbers. And so I believe we must balance that urgency with being prudent and proceeding deliberately and with an abundance of caution. And I think we're on our way to doing that. We know there will be challenges as we move forward. But I'm confident that we're on the right track, and that confidence is due to our teachers, our principals, and our families, who I want to sincerely thank for their grace and their patience. And we're going to ask everyone to continue to exercise grace and patience throughout this process. But I believe we're united in this work to accomplish our goals together. Thank you.
All right, well, on that note, that concludes our business for this evening, and I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hands. And for the board members?
Yes.
Aye, yes.
Aye.
Okay, opposed, seeing no opposition, we are adjourned.